A very warm welcome to another virtual ICMA, the Certified Management Accountants of Sri Lanka, the National Professional Management Accounting Body in Sri Lanka. CMA has always been keen about the updated knowledge of its students and the continuous professional development of its members, and has worked tirelessly during this pandemic to keep up with its vision and mission of being the best of the best in the field and arena, and is thus proudly celebrating its 20th anniversary of success this year. Today's webinar is on the budget highlights of 2021, tax proposals and impact on business and economy. On that note, I deem it a privilege to invite Professor Lakshman Arwatavala, the mastermind behind all endeavors of CMA Sri Lanka, to deliver the welcome address. Professor Lakshman Arwatavala has led the Sri Lankan accounting bodies, starting with the Chartered Accountants, the South Asian Federation of Accountants, founder of the Accounting Technicians and founder of CMA Sri Lanka, and the SAFA board member and a chairman of the SAFA International Relations Committee. He's also a proud receiver of the National Honor Sri Lanka Sikh Harmony in 2019, was installed in the Hall of Fame of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, and was awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award by CMA Sri Lanka. He's the former chairman of the Board of Investment Sri Lanka and People's Bank, and is currently the deputy chairman of Estate Ceylon PLC, a director of Lake House Printers and Publishers PLC, and Lanka IOC PLC. Professor Lakshman Arwatavala, I'm honored to invite you to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, Dilani. I think it was too long introduction, but anyway, thank you very much. Let me thank our Minister, Honorable Ajit Niwad Cabral, who's present here today, the State Minister of Money, Capital Markets and State Enterprise Reforms, our eminent speakers and panelists, and our moderator, and our members and other participants at this budget highlights 2021 tax proposals and impact on business and economy. I know that Honorable Minister, you have been attending, and I think you have been someone who has been mostly in demand, and we are proud because you are also a professional accountant, both the chartered and also a management accountant, and of course also you served as a vice president of accounting technicians. So all national bodies, I think that's a big achievement, because we need to speak of the national bodies, and I must thank you for accepting our invitation. So today we are very happy that we are able to discuss these budget highlights, and very eminent panel that we have. I'm sure that they will cover all areas. I would just speak a few words about the importance of this budget, and also the accountancy profession. I think that's something that we should do, because if you look at the budget itself, it's all composed of figures. And I thought that this is something that maybe our learned accountants and eminent professionals should look at closely. I'm sure the Honorable Minister has been working on it very, very closely, but this is something that is there. And one thing that is really baffling us is because most of those who are participants here are always looking at a positive side, you know, that they will never want to go for a deficit. But I suppose government budgeting and financing seems to be all on that side. But at least we should ensure that our income and expenditure are at least met. So this is another sort of a problem that we are facing, and this also needs professional accountants in all government departments, ministries, who will be able to really play this process. Because I was reading recently a publication put out by Transparency International, and they were saying that the corruption index is really directly proportional to the number of professional accountants who are there in the public sector. So if you have a lesser number of professional accountants, they have found that on the survey that they have done, that the corruption index was very high. Because in Sri Lanka, unfortunately, very few professional accountants are there. Now, if you look at the management accounting profession, in 2000, we really came up in 1999 with the assistance of CMA Canada, which is now as CPA Canada. But 2009, we were incorporated by an act of parliament. So the government recognized the real need. And at that, I think there was a half a day debate in the parliament where the ministers spoke of the need for management accountancy, and also to give that there is a very big shortage in the public sector, the government sector and the corporation sector. Then in 2014, the Honorable His Excellency the President, Mahinda Rajapaksa at that time, there was a cabinet paper and they approved that this shortage of accountants should be met by including the management accountants from Sri Lanka. But Honorable Minister, up to now, you see, then we had the new government coming in, and I can maybe say that they may have been delaying it, or they would have thought that the government servants are scared. They think that if they do something what the previous government have done, they'll be taken to task. But now things are different. 6 years have gone. We have produced 1,000 management accountants. None of them were able to apply for government jobs. Look at the amount of resources spent on this. Look at the effort put by the government, our villagers. This is not for the rich people. This is for the poor people. And we have not asked the government for a single cent to do this. So now I am again taking this up because His Excellency Mahinda Rajapaksa is now the Minister of Finance. I've also told him, but you can see that over a period of 6 years, 1,000 people who have qualified have lost. So these are really a big, maybe I don't think they realize it's not the fault of the parliament or the cabinet or the ministers. It is the government officials who have not been doing their job. The cabinet decision said within 1 month you must report to the cabinet. But unfortunately, I'm just saying this because today we have had a very good, maybe a development-oriented budget that is there. But if that is not implemented, then we are in serious trouble. So this is something that we should look at, and I think that is why more professional accountants are required. Every ministry should have a professional accountant, because then they will be able to set the standards. They will be able to do everything that is needed. Now, this budget is also very, very important. There are certain thrust areas. One is the knowledge economy, the technology that has to be done, then the agriculture. But what I want to say is, okay, we are spending, say, maybe almost 900 billion on government servants. Every ministry must have a KPI. Not one, but so many KPIs. Now, if agriculture is one of the top priorities of the government, the ministry must have the KPIs to improve the productivity, to improve the production, to have the right crop. That means all data. Now, these are things that must be done. Actually, if the budget is to be done, then we must have a separate implementation machinery that will achieve this. The data analytics that we are talking of, the big data that we are talking of, which we are now really giving it to our professional accountants, has to be taken into account. So I think everything is good, but these are things that have to be looked into. Then we are also very, very, I think I should say, Honorable Minister, cut up, because government is saying this budget only where they are spending the money. So now our professional bodies are not costing a single cent to the government. We can produce 100,000 professional accountants. Chartered accountants are there, management accountants are there, then the lower level accounting technicians are there. But government, actually, if they did this, we would have done our services without any cost to the government. They could have mentioned this in the budget, but no one is looking at us. So it is rather unfortunate that and we are bodies incorporated by Act of Parliament. So government has seen the need. We are a little different from the universities. We have more flexibility. We are self-supporting. We are not a burden on the government. So we can really produce maybe 100,000 accountants, which are here. All this government is short of all these people. So all this can be done. So I think I don't want to talk much on the budget, but what I want to say is that we are, as professionals, even if you take the marketing professionals, if you take the HR professionals, they would be able to solve a lot of the problems of the government. The chartered accountants, the management accountants, the accounting technicians. I think they should really make use of us. We will be able to really help the government. The financial knowledge is very, very essential. Then the income side, I think we are only spending. Tell the ministries they must give at least 25% in revenue they should earn. Now the passport division is earning that. The people who are giving the ID is doing that. Then why can't the other ministries earn that? If they are going to be put into this sort of thing to earn money, then their whole concept will change. Now at the moment, they think we will get the salary, we will get the pension, and we can sleep at home. But today, COVID-19 has really turned the whole thing. We are now all together here because of this Zoom, the technology that we are having. So I'm very happy that the government is going to install the necessary infrastructure to give this to everyone. Now take the universities. Today, they may not be able to work. But if they use the technology, they can double or treble the intake. They don't have to put new universities. It's a hybrid. You see what we call hybrid. You have classroom, you have video lectures. The problem is sorted. Actually, these are new ideas, new thoughts that have to come from the professionals. If they asked us, we would have really given that. But I know that our honorable minister is there and he will do justice because these are ideas, because he's been really doing these things. If you see his book on relations, I think for Sri Lanka, these are all mentioned there. What should be done? The public sector now, they are losing heavily. Is there a single cent coming from the public sector as dividends to the government? No, the budget has to give money to them. So that there we really need a full change in all these things, and the professional accountants are the people who can really make this. So with those remarks, I am very thankful, Honorable Minister is here, because you are not only representing Sri Lanka, you are the president, past president of the South Asian Federation of Accountants. I think we are all proud that the whole of South Asia is being represented by you in the Sri Lankan Parliament, and a very important area of the finance, the capital markets, which we are doing. So let me again, once again, thank you, and also everyone. And I'm sure that everyone will be able to gain from this budget highlights that we are doing, the tax proposals, and the impact on the business and economy, and that you will all contribute to the development of the economy, especially at a time where we are in a great difficulty of COVID-19. We will be able to take the country forward. Thank you, and all the best.
That, ladies and gentlemen, was Professor Lakshmana Vatawala, also honored by the presence of Honorable Ajit Cabral, the State Minister of Money and Capital Market and State Enterprise Reforms, as our chief guest and keynote speaker for today's event. Mr. Cabral was the 12th governor of the Central Bank of Sri Lanka and the chairman of the Monetary Board from 2006 to 2015. At that time, he also functioned as an alternate governor of the International Monetary Fund. He's a former chairman of the Southeast Asian Central Bank's Board of Governors and the SAARC Central Bank Governors Forum. He's a chartered accountant by profession, having qualified as one of the youngest chartered accountants in Sri Lanka, while winning many prizes at examinations. He's a past president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka and the South Asian Federation of Accountants. In August 2019, the Sri Lanka Ramanya Mahanikaya bestowed the honor of Deshakirti Lankaputra in appreciation of his outstanding contribution to the Sri Lankan economy, country, and the people of Sri Lanka. Honorable Ajit Cabral, we are very pleased to have you with us today. Over to you, sir, for the keynote address.
Thank you very much. Let me at the outset say thank you to my friend Lakshman as well. And before I commence on the budget itself, I'd like to respond to a few of the points that Lakshman made, his to-do list, as it were. Number one, I think sometimes, Lakshman, we got to also realize that a deficit is not always a bad thing. Now, if you take many other companies in which you're all involved in, have been in the private sector for about 32 years of my career, and we have overdrafts, we have loans, we say we are leveraged, all that means we are running a deficit. That's why we want to have another source of financing to provide capital as well as funds to our businesses. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's also the way in which we would finance so that we can make more funds and make more profits subsequently. So that's the philosophy of deficit financing. And I think sometimes it is necessary in order to have a greater pool of capital to deal with the situation. And I believe that's something that we should be conscious of. The second is Lakshman's point with regard to the CMAs. Well, I think he makes a good point, but I think our government has been in place for the last 3 months, and maybe the priorities that we have had to deal with have been such that this may not have come to the surface yet, but with his persistent work, I'm sure it will come into the radar screen of the government, and we will certainly have a look at that once we get going in time to come. The other point with regard to the KPIs, you know, this is the gazette that the president set out on the 12th of August 2020 when he appointed all the ministers. When he appointed the ministers as well as the state ministers, there was in this gazette a very clear indication of the functions and responsibilities of the ministers. And there was also a very clear indication of the overall KPIs. He actually has made reference to the priorities that need to be fulfilled by all these ministers and state ministers. So I think the most important step in setting out what the responsibilities are and what the outcomes are and what the outputs would be has been already established. And you can be sure that all ministers as well as state ministers are today judged as well as evaluated as being effective or not based on these KPIs that have been set out. So government is now conscious of that. For the first time, we have been able to bring that accountability into the highest echelons of government in this country. And I believe we should now improve that further. But in the meantime, what I would like to see is the business circles, the accountants and the public, as well as the media, also referring to these KPIs and evaluating ministers as well as ministries vis-a-vis these outcomes that have been set out for them. Now, let me come to the budget. A lot of people have been asking me, what is this budget all about? What is the way in which this budget will, how will this budget be functioning? In fact, I set out around 15 or 16 different items in my budget final speech that I made in Parliament. Unfortunately, I couldn't complete all those items because of the fact that there was several other matters that had to be taken up and we couldn't go through all. But I would like to just very quickly run past you those items so that then you will be able to see for yourself what this budget process has been about. Now, if you were to see, you would find that what was the thrust of this budget? What was the budget all about? Now, that is a question that many people have been asking me. And what I would like to tell you is the budget has been a growth-oriented budget. The growth has to be, just one second, can you just put this in order? Number order. The budget has been a growth orientation. We have also focused on getting stable macro fundamentals. We want to see the macro fundamentals back to the levels that we had at least in 2014, because in 2014 you would have seen that we had almost all macro fundamentals, whether it's the rupee, whether it's interest rates, whether it's our reserves, whether it's unemployment, almost all macro fundamentals were in good shape. Unfortunately, during the last few years, it suffered, but now it's time for us to get back in shape. And one of the priorities that this budget is setting out is to ensure that we have those macro fundamentals back in the benign levels and not in the current levels, which we find somewhat stressful at the moment. The third is the infrastructure development. And when I say infrastructure development, not only the hard infrastructure, but also the soft infrastructure. Some items we need to ensure that the ways in which we are doing business is made better. But at the same time, we must also see that all the services that are used in the production of these economic activities are also upgraded. For example, the port, the airport, the road network, the electricity. While those are also being upgraded, we need to see that our soft skills like the personnel, the way in which we do business, our health services, our education services, all that is part of our infrastructure. And we need to ensure that that is also improved continuously. The fourth is the poverty alleviation. There are certain stressful segments of our population which need support. So the budget will be focusing on providing relief to those parts of our society who need support. And here I don't mean only the support that is needed to do business or to take steps to improve their lot, but also certain social problems like the human-elephant conflict. We need to ensure that we are able to deal with it so that the people in those 14 districts which are affected by the human-elephant conflict can get about their normal work. Now, we have seen in so many instances, people in those districts unable to carry out their normal tasks. Children cannot go to school sometimes. We sometimes see the human-elephant conflict as only being when an elephant attacks a human being or a human being attacks an elephant. But that's on the surface. But deep down, we see the interruptions to business, to schooling, to health services, the fact that people have to stop all their economic activities by around 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening. Now, these are all very, very tangible problems that people are encountering. So we need to deal with those as well. So the budget will take care of all that stuff. The second part of the budget is to drive growth. We need to have certain stimuli to make growth happen once again. As you know, even during the time of the war, we had 6% plus growth. And the total period from 2006 to 2014, during the time of President Mahinda Rajapaksa, we averaged 6.5% growth. Now that was, mind you, with all the challenges that we had to face. We faced the challenge of the oil at $145. We faced the challenge of the bank crisis, the challenge of the economic crisis. All these were crises, no doubt, and together with our war as well. But we faced all that, but we were focused on growth so that that process continued, notwithstanding those challenges. So the challenges were part and parcel of our management technique in order to overcome those challenges, but we got to go forward, notwithstanding those challenges. Now, sometimes people ask me, this budget doesn't increase taxes. Why is it? Can you make ends meet? Yes, we can. The main point that I want to stress here is that we need not put additional pressure on an already struggling business sector. We want to ensure that people are able to retain sufficient savings with them in order to spur growth. If growth takes place, like what happened during the time of 2006 to 2014, you would find that opportunities for taxation will also become greater. It is possible for us to take a higher quantum of money through a lower percentage of taxes rather than going it the other way around. So I think we need to deal with that kind of a situation. Are we okay? Yeah, we need to deal with that. And that is why we have made our taxation policy consistent. Many expected Sri Lanka's government to feel uncomfortable and then to up the taxes once again. And many may have even not faulted us if we had done that. But we wanted to be sure that people get a very clear message that the taxation structure that we have put in place is going to be consistent and is not going to change every time we have additional challenges being faced by the economy. But the point that we would like to make is that we want to stop the leakages. That's why we have taken many steps to improve the way in which the tax administration will take place. And that's where I think we will be focusing on in the next few months and years. Widen the tax base, reduce the leakages, and give confidence to the economic stakeholders that we have a consistent tax policy. We also have been asked whether there would be enough investment coming given the current circumstances, given the current challenges. I think here we need to recognize that if we were to put in place the right frame of policies, people will come and invest. Just 2 days ago, the new investment for a tire factory costing, where the investment is going to be $300 million, with a further investment of another $300 million coming in shortly, was signed in the presence of the Prime Minister and several other dignitaries. Now that shows the confidence of the outside stakeholders, and we have seen that stirring. We have seen new investment being spoken of, and I myself have had many calls as well as visits from different people saying that they want to do new projects, and that's happening already. We have seen the airport project taking shape. That's another $700 million project. The airport modernization as well as improvement in the structure so that we can have another 1 million visitors coming into Sri Lanka. And we have also seen the government having 289 projects of over ₹1 billion each, with a total capacity of around 5.2 trillion rupees. Now that part of the work is being handled by monitoring, is being handled by my ministry. And we are very keen to ensure that any bottlenecks as far as these projects are concerned are immediately dealt with, so that we can move forward with a lot more success, and ensuring that these projects are on time and on budget. So we are already working on those. And I think with the new projects that are in place, as well as the opportunities that we are creating in the port city, in the Hambantota port city, in the Hambantota port industrial zone, in the new pharmaceutical zone, in the new educational zone, plus with all the other facilities that are being provided, we are sure that this growth momentum will once again take place, and we are looking forward to supporting that in time to come. And the lower interest rates, the stable rupee, will all contribute towards inducing more and more people to invest. We have also been asked whether why we haven't specifically mentioned about the COVID and allocated certain funds for the COVID. Here I want to mention, Mr. Chairman, that overall, we see that as yet one more challenge in our spectrum of challenges that we would face in the next few years. We have dealt with challenges in the past. We have seen how to deal with the challenges, but we have a clear vision as to where we are going. Sometimes if you have a clear vision and you want to go there, notwithstanding the different problems that you encounter, you will still overcome those and go forward. So for example, if you're thinking of going to Kandy, sometimes when you go a certain distance, you might find that there is a roadblock somewhere. So you may take a different route, and yet your focus is going to Kandy. In the same way, we have a focus of generating 6.5% growth. We have a focus of alleviating poverty. We want to maintain our interest rates at reasonable levels. We want to see that our rupee is stable. Now, these are goals that we got to aim at, notwithstanding the regular challenges that we would face. I know that the COVID challenge is a formidable challenge, but it is just like the other challenges that we have faced. So we need to take measures to deal with it, but at the same time, go forward with clarity so that we can deliver on the results that we have set out to do. The other part that many people have asked me is, what about the benefits? What are the benefits? I think the business circles know what benefits we are given with regard to the stock exchange, with regard to capital markets, with regard to taxation policy, with regard to the way we are doing business. All that has been done, and I think there has been a lot of discussion, and from the panel of speakers that I see, I'm sure those are already going to be addressed at this seminar today, and I think we are in good hands. But where we should really be looking at is to have a stable country. And if we are to have a stable country, we need to ensure that certain other benefits to all parts of the population are also provided. Otherwise, Sri Lanka will not be able to move forward with so much of clarity as well as with confidence. So that's why there are certain features of the budget where we have dealt with building 100,000 kilometers of road, where we have made sure that the present day provision of water on tap to people is doubled. At the moment, we have only about 50% of the population being able to have water. In my original view, it was around 44%. But I'm told that we have now got about 50% of the population in that category. But that means we have yet another 50% more to be given water. So projects have to be launched in order to provide water. We need to deal with the other situations like the health services as well as education. Now, all these need to go together, and that's what we will be focusing on in the future. We're also focusing on not increasing our indebtedness, particularly in relation to our foreign debt. We know that in the period from about April 2018 to June 2019, in just a very quick period of 15 months, Sri Lanka had borrowed as much as $6.9 billion from international markets. Now, that was a large chunk of money to come in foreign exchange, and that tilted the foreign debt to local debt from around the 40% of foreign debt and 60% of local debt, right up to 50% of foreign debt and 50% only of local debt. Now, that particular equation is quite a tense equation, and we need to now relax that once again. We need to ensure that that total quantum of foreign borrowings is reduced so that we'll have less vulnerability and we will be able to face the situation with a lot more confidence. So we have certain targets that have been set out to ensure that the total debt to GDP ratio is brought down in the next 5 years to around about the 70% mark from the current more than 90% that we have been subjected to. If you recollect, in 2006, when we took over last time, we had a debt to GDP ratio of 91%, which was systematically brought down to 70% by 2014. But now it has again gone up again. And now we got to claw back once again. And that's something that we would be doing in time to come. And that's a tough call, but something that needs to be done with finesse. We need to ensure that our interest rates stay stable. We need to ensure that our rupee stays stable. We need to ensure that we borrow carefully. We need to ensure that when we borrow as much as possible in local rupees and not in foreign currency. So it's a total management that is necessary if you are to get out of this debt situation. And that's something that we would be giving top priority in the next few months and weeks. We also want to maintain, as I mentioned earlier, the macro fundamentals in good shape. And sometimes people ask us why we are not seeking the IMF support. Actually, at the time that we reached out to the IMF in 2007 and 2008, at that time, the entire globe was in difficulty, and Sri Lanka also had to give itself support. But subsequently, we have been in the markets. We have gained the confidence of the market participants, where we issued as much as $14 billion worth of debt in international sovereign bonds. We are now able to issue Sri Lanka development bonds. So we have a wide range of products that we can now access. We can also access certain bilateral funds from India, from China. So these are all possibilities that we need to also consider. And when you consider all these possibilities, I think we don't need to rush to the IMF as the first choice. So IMF can be around, but at the moment, we are quite comfortable about dealing with the situation. And I think, as I mentioned this before, Sri Lanka can manage this situation without having to borrow from the IMF or accede to certain conditions that the IMF may impose on us, which the business circles will certainly find it very challenging to encounter. So we are doing that in such a way that we can steer the ship with with the participation of so many other stakeholders, and we're confident that we would be able to do that. Many people also ask, what's going to happen to the import substitution measures that we have put in place? Yes, at that particular moment of time, when the COVID shock took us by surprise, there was a situation that we did not have sufficient reserves to encounter this shock if we had not curtailed our imports as well. So it was a choice whether we would allow imports to come in freely, and which would have may have resulted in the rupee depreciating further, and sometimes we may have been looking at a rupee which was around the 250 rupee mark, and at that time anyway the imports would have stalled. So we took the cautious decision and the important decision of ensuring that we are able to deal with the complication that arose at that time, and we are now confident that we can gradually relax, as we have already done, certain items so that we can allow imports to come in as and when we are having the capacity to absorb those imports as well. In the meantime, there have been several salutary conditions that have been visible, particularly the remittances improving, perhaps because of the fact that there were certain constraints and hawala and the legal means of money coming in. So these have also helped Sri Lanka in some other way, while there have been some challenges as well. I will conclude by giving a little bit of a overview with regard to the stock exchange and the capital markets, which is one of my own responsibilities. At the time that I took office, I did mention to the stakeholders in the stock exchange and the stock market and the SEC that we need to see at least 500 companies being listed. Lakshman had been one of the SEC board members during the time that he was the chair, he was the president of the Institute of Chartered Accountants, and so was I. And even at that time, we had about 250 companies listed. Today also we have the same number. But we need to make the stock exchange and the stock market and the capital markets a lot more vibrant. We need to have more companies listed. We need to ensure that the total market capitalization is a fairly high percentage of the GDP of our country. We need to see that new sectors, particularly the SME sector, the startups, the BOI companies, the port city that is going to be now generating a lot more economic activity, as well as the REITs, which has already been set out, are entering into the stock exchange and the stock market, so that we can see a large number of resources coming into the stock market, and that being a proper depository of funds that can be used by businesses. So we have our work cut out. There is a lot of stuff that we would need to do in the next few months and years. And the platform for the visions and the vistas of prosperity as enunciated by President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, the stage has been set for that. And I think by using that stage properly, by using that platform well, we would be able to generate a lot more economic activity, and that would mean that we would be moving towards prosperity as time goes on. I know we will have certain challenges, we will have certain stresses that we have to encounter on this journey, but I think what we have been able to put together is going to be helpful to the businesses to come and play their part. I will finish by talking about the role that I think the accountants should play. I think there's a very fine opportunity for the accountants of this country, be they chartered accountants, management accountants, government accountants, all of them. They have different roles to play and different contributions to make. And I think the amount of knowledge they have gained, as well as the experience that they have, and will be very useful in taking this country forward. And I would like to see them also engaging their clients, telling them what is available, what is possible, and so that together we can make this journey. So thank you very much, Lakshman, for this invitation. I enjoyed, as always, having to participate in your seminars. Lakshman Vatawala has been a stalwart in the accountancy field. I think no conversation about accounting can take place without the name Lakshman R. Vatawala being mentioned. And I think we should also pay a tribute to you for the interest that you have taken, the initiatives that you have taken to take the accountancy profession forward. And I want to congratulate you at this moment of time for your efforts as well. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, Mr. Minister. I am Duminder Hulangamur. You joined us in a couple of other sessions that we had in the past, and I think you participated in the first session, which we organized from our own firm. How long do you have, Mr. Minister, for some questions we take?
15 minutes. If you can release me, that'll be...
Right. Okay, thank you. So it's 2:30 now. By 2:45, I'll release you.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Yes. So thank you, Mr. Minister. I think you have very well articulated. This is about the third or fourth time I'm listening to you since Wednesday. And you have very consistently, very well articulated your position as well as the government's position on the 2021 budget. Some of the areas that you touched on, before I come to that, I want to also, the first question I want to raise is an area that you did not touch for reasons probably you feel that you can take other questions and answer session. Is one of your roles, in addition to being the State Minister of Finance, is also public sector reform. You mentioned about public sector reform in a couple of other sessions that you had, and you made some very important points. So for the benefit of this audience, Mr. Minister, I want to ask you, a lot of governments successively have been talking about public sector reforms for the last many years. But we, the CEB, the electricity, there is electricity board, the water board, the railways, the transport boards, all of them have been basically recruitment grounds for successive governments. And a lot of people talk about reforms, but every year the losses keep increasing, the efficiency levels go down. So you have a huge task ahead of you in reforming these institutions. So in what ways and forms do you plan, Mr. Minister, to reform public enterprises?
Thank you very much. I think, as you quite rightly mentioned, it is a formidable task to improve these public institutions. But my initial examination of the conditions of these institutions tell me that it is not necessarily only inefficiency that has driven these institutions to those levels. There has been policy guidelines that have been issued perhaps by the government for good reason, bad reason, or whatever reason, that has also prompted this situation. For example, the electricity board does not have overall authority to change the pricing of electricity. So in certain instances, when you do have some stress that is being caused as a result of oil prices or the mix of the electricity being changed for various reasons, they do not have the flexibility to change that, and sometimes they incur a loss. Same with the Petroleum Corporation. Now, there are other institutions like the Sri Lankan Airlines, which maybe sometimes be making losses, but they also fulfill a major role in bringing tourists into Sri Lanka as well as visitors into Sri Lanka. So there are different objectives. And I think all these institutions must be measured, not necessarily only by what they make as profits in rupees and cents. How do they fulfill the objective? That's why the KPIs are important. And in my meetings so far that I've held with these different institutions, we have stressed on the KPIs. Take even the example of the central bank. The central bank can make a profit of its own by merely adjusting the price of the rupee. If they depreciate the currency, the entire stock of reserves that they have, let's say it's $7 billion, can be increased by 5 rupees and overnight, and that would be 35 billion rupees, and that can be technically shown as its profit. But the central bank is not viewed by the profit that it makes, but by the objectives that it is there to fulfill: price stability as well as financial system stability. Now, that's a good example of what should be the yardstick or the measurement. So my assessment of these institutions would be primarily driven by the role that they are expected to play in the economy as well as in the country, and to see whether those are fulfilled. And whilst doing that, we need to ensure that the management is effective, and that is important. So good people must man them, good results must be all set out so that the KPIs, as Lakshman mentioned very clearly, are adhered to, and someone must monitor these. So we have in our own ministry that already set up, where we have this project monitoring as well as monitoring of these institutions. We will have regular review meetings. And I'm quite excited about the proposition that we have been entrusted with this task. And we would be keen to establish overall guidelines that would mean that these institutions will do better. Now, I also appreciate that the time that we would have where we have to monitor about 400 state institutions that we have may not be enough to do all. So we'll probably use the 80-20 principle and look at the top ones so that we make sure that those are effective, and then issue certain guidelines for the others to also fulfill, and then see whether some other institutions that are also there as watchdogs can also improve the performance of these institutions. So yes, I do recognize it's a tough call, but I'm confident that with the management techniques that we ourselves would be implementing, we would be able to realize results. And we would also, whilst doing that, be concentrating, Duminder, on the overall doing business indicators as well, because those also will probably drive better management of these institutions. So they will perform better, and that would be in the interests of all stakeholders of the economy.
Govinda, if I can just make one comment.
Yes.
I think, Honorable Minister, you mentioned about this, mainly CEB and CPC, because if the government is deciding the price, now that is where the accounting policies come in. So, because if it is a decision taken by the government, then they have to now work out the cost. And then the government will have to give a subsidy, because they should not be running at a loss. Now, at the moment, we can't determine whether they are efficient or whether it is due to certain policy decisions of the government. So I think this is an area I would suggest, now that corporations are being looked into, that if you can kindly look into it, definitely it will make the corporations more efficient, so that you then work out the difference as a subsidy from the government.
Thank you, Lakshman. We'll keep that in mind. That's a useful indicator. The way that we are looking at it now is that sometimes we take a time horizon during which time we would like to see a neutral situation. There may be occasions when prices go up, at which time we may be inclined not to increase prices in tandem. But at the time that when prices go down in some of those inputs, we might not adjust the pricing so much, because then we'll be able to recover those losses through the institution itself. Now, that's one way of doing it. Then the other way would be to ensure that our loans that are taken by those institutions are also carefully monitored. The rupee itself, if you take the cost of production with regard to both the CEB as well as the CPC, a large portion of that is rupee determined, because they are importing, and that is converted into rupees, and at which stage the value of the rupee is a critical part of their total cost. So if there is a careful management of the rupee, that will also impact the pricing, and those are all matters that need to be looked at in a holistic manner. And your point is well taken. Accountants' contribution is definitely important there.
Thank you, Professor. Mr. Minister, another question that the private sector is asking for, I don't know if it's too early to clarify, is a proposal with regard to increasing the retirement age of private sector employees to 60. As you know, currently, private sector employees are not mandated by law to have retirement age. Any rationale for that thinking, Mr. Minister, that you can explain?
See, at the time that this age limit was fixed as retirement, the life expectancy was in the region of about 57, 58, maybe 60 years at the maximum. And then people were retiring at 55. So it seemed reasonable. But today, with good medicine, with good health practices and all of that, we lived much longer. So people lived till about 78, 79. So if you retire at 55, then society needs to look after them for a period of about 24 years after retirement. And most of those people who are retiring them in that 55 also are very robust, and they are, I'm sure, able to contribute a lot more. Their intellectual prowess is at their peak. They can contribute a lot more, and we may be losing out on that contribution that can also occur. So I think it's a conscious decision that many countries have taken, that we allow people to work longer. At the same time, we need to manage the overall process of ensuring that the levels of unemployment don't get out of hand. But when you lock a particular situation like that into the overall framework, then more and more people will start thinking about these things, and the contribution that people will generate also can be much better and much higher. So I think what is important for us to understand is we got to gain the knowledge as well as experience and the contribution of people beyond 55, because many of them can contribute a lot more. And from society's angle also, by ensuring that that contribution takes place, the period in which society needs to support them with pensions or with other types of support can be less. So many people, I'm sure, would opt to work till 60. And if you tell even if people have to work beyond that, I'm sure many people will welcome that move, because rather than staying at home and being healthy and quite robust, why should you deprive them of making that contribution? So I think we got to take changes as we go on. And now it may be a good pointer to make that this factor needs to be considered for the future as well.
Thank you, Minister. It's a very laudable idea, but the question they ask is why you want to mandate it by law? Can't you leave the choice to the private sector companies and the employee to decide that?
Yeah. Now, the law mandated 55. Nobody grumbled about it. At that time, when the life expectancy was 59 or 60, the law mandated 55, and for women at 50. So it was a mandate.
Right.
So why not mandate it now? So I think the flexibility cannot be provided when there is a good thing to be done. Sometimes it is necessary to give an indication as to what the country also would be comfortable in working through. So I think that's what reforms are about. And we talk about it, but then as soon as a reform comes, I think the private sector must also embrace that. Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
Certainly. The point taken is Minister. My third question to you, I think you have about 4 minutes left from the original time you gave me.
Yes.
Is as a practitioner, and I also as a member of the Ceylon Chamber and also the Institute, I really appreciate the fact that you all have kept the tax rates consistent. Whether it's high or low, you all have kept it consistent. So by that, why should you give relief to the private sector? You all have taken a big challenge upon yourself of maintaining the budget deficit. I think you have answered this question during the session, but I want a pointed question, is that we are expecting a 2 trillion tax revenue in the context of a tax revenue which the government or the departments are saying they will not be achieved for 2020 on the estimated budgeted basis. So in the event, I mean, God willing, everything will go well, and then no one can predict the future. But there are some disruptions because of COVID, etc., and we are unable to meet the tax revenues that you are predicting. Then what will be the recourse? Will the tax rates go up? Then will the resort domestic borrowing or international borrowing and put pressure on interest rates and inflation, the exchange rate? To ask, you asked this question in general, but in a pointed question I want to ask you.
Yeah, I think, Dominic, that's a valid question, a fair one. Now, there is always the risk that certain steps that we take may not materialize in exactly the way that we had thought through. Yes, that is a risk. But at the same time, we have also given the direction in which we are going. We have also indicated that we wouldn't want to increase our foreign debt burden. So there would be naturally a part of it if we have a shortfall in the total income, we may need to recourse to have further borrowings. If we were able to get these taxes in, then we may have less borrowings. So either we can curtail some part of the development activities and then have that as a buffer so that we don't spend that much, and then we only have that amount that we can afford, or we can reduce the amount of borrowings that we are doing. Again, this is a choice, but we have given indication that the foreign borrowings will be not an option that we would like to be making use of, but it will be local borrowings. So local borrowings also, we would use that as in a judicious manner so that we don't allow the interest rates to also go up. So it's a careful mix. If we can borrow, without allowing the interest rates to go up, we might still continue with the projects that we are intending to do. But if we find that there is an interest rate hike going to take place as a result of borrowing, then we might curtail the number of projects that we are doing or slow down some of these projects. So these are all management techniques, like all of you managing your cash flow. Sometimes you make a little bit of adjustment as you go on. So the government also will have to do that. And I think the overall direction is clear. We would want to bring down our foreign borrowings down. We want to ensure that our debt to GDP is kept as low as possible. But within those constraints, there can be some adjustment that we would be doing. And that's the path that we would traverse. So I think right now I'm taking the optimistic view that with the conditions that we are given, we'll probably have the economy growing. And if the economy is growing, we would find that the number of transactions taking place as well as the incomes of people will go up. The other customs revenues, the excise revenues and income tax revenues will all go up, in which case we would perhaps be able to realize these numbers that as put out. But otherwise, there are certain other aspects that we'll have to tweak in order to get to the same type of equation.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. I think you have always been optimistic. Even the last time you were holding the governor, you were very optimistic, and we all have confidence in you. Thank you very much for this. I have stopped exactly at 2:45.
Thank you. I really appreciate that, Devinder.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
you.
you.
That you have joined us, and your level of enthusiasm and the interest in the subject matter has remained the same. Thank you, Mr. Over to you, Mr. Waterman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. I think we are very thankful to you for being here, because you really spoke of the budget, the highlights of the budget, and the macro fundamentals, and also the different sectors which are really going to take the economy forward. Because it's not an easy time, but we must congratulate you, because at a very, very difficult time, I think you have been able to really show as to how the country can go forward, looking at the economic revival and also the poverty alleviation and reduction that was mentioned by the Honorable Prime Minister. And of course, the most important thing that we mentioned, one is the value creation. Now, you see, all this money that is being used, these are public money given for state development, pay their salaries and everything. So they must really have that in mind, what you mentioned of the value that they should create. And of course, the KPIs, which you will ensure that the state corporations are going to do. But the most fundamental and the most important of total management. Now, management should be the most important thing. So we are proud that maybe we have politicians of your caliber who are there, who not only know the accounting area, but the management area, and of course, how you can balance the budget. I'm sure as the former governor of the central bank, you will know as to how this could be done. So thank you very much, Mr. Minister. I'm sure that you will take the accountancy profession into confidence, because I think we need changes in the Companies Act, which just says that one should maintain a book of accounts. That is not what we need. We need more detail so that there won't be criticism, because there was some criticism in the budget. But if you are to avoid that, let us put strictly maybe that they will have the costing records, they will have the accounting records and everything, so that they will not be able to play the fool, because ultimately the bankers are the losers. So thank you very much. I'm sure these are good thoughts that we are leaving with you, and we can be rest assured that you are going to support us, and we wish you all the best. And I must tell you that, congratulate you that you have been the most sought after speaker about the budget, because I have not seen anyone else, but I've seen maybe at every forum that you were there, and also if you all open the newspapers, it's all what you have explained. So thank you very much. I'm sure you have a very major role to play, and that you will help to take the country forward. Thank you, and all the best.
Thank you very much, Lakshman. I wish all of you all the best, and I'm sure with your guidance, you will do extraordinarily well, and my best wishes to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. That was Honorable Ajit Tiwari Cabral, the State Minister of Money and Capital Markets and State Enterprise Reforms. Next on agenda is a talk on taxation proposals in the budget of 2021, done by none other than the best to speak of the same, Mr. Nisar Suleiman, a partner of the tax practice Ernst & Young. He's an associate member of the Institute of Chartered Accountants of Sri Lanka and an associate member of the Institute of Chartered Management Accountants of the United Kingdom. Over to you, sir.
Thank you for that introduction. Let me share my screen very quickly. Can you see the screen clearly?
Yeah, we can see. Okay, fine, good.
Oh, thank you. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the session at the CMA. What I will be taking you through is the budget proposal, especially focused on tax at a glance. Sorry. So this presentation is basically is based on the budget proposals that were read out by the Prime Minister and Honorable Minister of Finance, Honorable Mahinda Rajapaksa, last week on November 17th, which focuses mainly on strengthening the 2021 to 2023 medium-term program of poverty alleviation and economic revival as envisaged within the government's policy. So the contents are basically, we'll be focusing on a quick summary of the budget numbers. The new taxes, which are very few, as discussed by the minister, which we will be introducing to you. A plethora of concessions have been given in addition to the concessions already given. Moving more towards tax holidays again seems to be the direction. A few provisions for banking and financial services. Tax administration shows quite a few changes. Vat and tariff changes also quite minimal, but significant in terms of tariff. A host of COVID-19 reliefs for industry and small businesses. And then if we do have time, the budget proposals, a quick summary of it will be run through. So that's the lineup that we're going to talk on. So a very quick summary of the budget. We're expecting a revenue of 2 trillion, an expenditure of 3.5 trillion, which leaves us with a deficit of 1.5 trillion, right? And that is a deficit to GDP of 8.9%. And out of total revenue, tax revenue is expected to be 85%, which again is quite significant. The inflation projected is 5% with the growth rate over the medium term to be in the region of 6% is what the budget said. So the new taxes, what is new in terms of this budget? The insurance fund, contribution to insurance fund has been introduced by the Honorable Minister, where a 0.25% is to be collected, 0.25% of turnover is to be collected from businesses having employees exceeding 50. Right? If you have more than 50 employees, you would someone who has to pay this tax or this insurance, contribute to this insurance scheme. And the budget states that this money appears to be used for smaller level wholesale, retail, and companies with 5 or more employees, and also for the hotel sector. So the questions that arise as a result of this is, how is, for example, this scheme going to be administered, right? For example, which businesses and factories are covered. So now in the recent discussions we had with the ministry officials, they are open to having certain segments excluded, for example, places like those that got impacted by COVID and not having enough business, like in tourism and so forth. So those conditions will have come through. And also the mechanism of collection, and then also how are we going to fund or utilize these funds to those struggling segments in the area. I think somebody is, can everyone mute please? There's a bit of a disturbance. Thank you. Yes, also whether this is an annual, quarterly, or monthly contribution, is it something like, ESC and NBT that was there is another doubt that has come into contention. Whether it will be deductible for income tax because it's going to be an expense hitting a lot of people's P&Ls, and who would administer it, for example, whether it's the Commissioner General or whether it will be the insurance regulator, for example, are doubts that are currently awaiting clarification. Hopefully the bill and future discussions with the ministry will bring that out. The next new tax that has been proposed is a special goods and services tax. This, of course, the budget claims is to rationalize the taxation of several big contributors to tax revenue, right? To rationalize all of these major industries that contribute to various taxes, whether it be excise or telecom, and to rationalize it where these regulatory bodies can focus away from tax collection and go more towards regulatory is the thinking that has come out in the budget. So this ST, the basis of it being prescribed is to replace all of these individual taxes and have a composite tax. It is expected to come into force from January 2021. So we should expect the bill shortly, in my view. So these are the segments that are going to get covered. Alcohol, which is currently having a VAT and excise duty. Cigarettes, which has an excise duty. Telco having a telecommunication levy of 11.25 and a cess. Betting and gaming, and motor vehicles, which has only an excise duty. So some of these have VAT as well, some don't. So how are they going to rationalize it is the question that comes up, and whether there will be an input mechanism, because if VAT is going to be included in this tax base, then whether an input mechanism will be given, or whether that input is going to be a tax, a cost to each of these industries, is something that is under discussion at the moment. So clarity on that is also required for these industries. Right, so one of the main focus areas again has been concessions, tax holidays, and tax breaks given to certain trust industries, we could call it, because the budget has focused on some of them. So as at January 1st, 2020, there were a host of concessions given where rates were brought down, certain industries were made exempt. So in addition to that, the 2021 budget also gives tax holidays now, which was not a common thing in the last 3 to 5 years. We have started again with tax holidays, as well as reintroducing or effecting the strategic development law, which gave significant concessions as well. So the areas of focus are agriculture has been looked at, energy and sustainable development, construction, local manufacturing, information technology and warehouse services, vocational training, and development of capital markets. So 7 areas that have been specified for tax concessions. So if you take the first one of value added agriculture products, to promote this segment, a permission is to be granted for the import of unique raw materials and intermediate products that cannot be manufactured in the country at the moment, right? So this includes high technology imports as well. There is to be an import tax removal on these products, which are yet to be identified. In addition to that, there is a concession for a customs duty exemption, actually, financial facilities to obtain land and modern equipment for investing in value-added products using pepper cloves, cardamom, and coffee for the export market. So there is a thrust to add value. So it has been tea most of the time and other agricultural products, but these four have been identified by the government to enhance value addition and enhance exports. So these concessions of duty and financing has been suggested. Also, there is a 10-year tax holiday under the Strategic Development Law to be introduced for this agriculture sector or value-added products, value-added agricultural products, where the investment exceeds 10 million US dollars. It is also proposed to support the scheme to promote cultivation of ginger and turmeric, which was also banned as a result of COVID. So the other three areas of concessions given, dairy has come in where there is an accelerated depreciation given for the latest technology to be used to collect liquid milk and thereby enhance the liquid milk production and the agricultural sector as a whole. Also a 5-year tax holiday where 25 million USD is invested in milk powder processing. It appears to be for export is what is mentioned in the budget speech. Fisheries have also been given some concessions, special import mechanism to import fish that are not available in Sri Lanka for the production of dried fish, moldy fish, and also canned fish. So that will enhance manufacturing in canned fish where we don't have particular types of fish. Simplified administrative process for exportation of fish and aquatic plants also to be introduced. In farming, an import duty concessions are granted for import relating to cold room facilities for the preservation of fruits and vegetables. We hear that about 40% of the produce is damaged or destroyed, and this initiative is probably to make sure that there's a high usage of fruits and vegetables in the market. Credit facilities are to be given for this as well. In addition to agriculture, they have also identified energy and sustainable development. So there's a huge thrust to increase energy production by a capacity of 1,000 megawatts, where 100 megawatt projects are to be introduced through the Board of Investment, and a 7-year tax holiday is to be granted for renewable energy projects. Also, the establishment of 2 natural gas power plants also on the cards. Recycling is also promoted with the 10-year tax holiday for the recycling of construction material. Construction industry also has been given several domestic industrialists a 5-year tax holiday for domestic industrialists building telecommunication towers, right, which is quite widespread, and infrastructure using domestic labor and materials. So there's a 5-year tax holiday there. For the government infrastructure, we saw significant investment in roads, about 100,000 kilometers is what was proposed. So for these projects, raw materials such as cement, premix, iron rods, bitumen, that cannot be produced domestically are to be imported duty-free and with other concessions. All imported items for government projects will be exempted from duty, thereby reducing the cost that the contractors do charge. So that will also be a benefit ultimately to get the investments and the projects going. Import of machinery for the construction industry with modern technologies also to be exempt from duties. For the manufacturing industry, boat and shipbuilding is offered a 7-year tax holiday and long-term credit facilities to promote boat and shipbuilding. A modern investment zone is to be set up for as a strategic development project, and exporters are to get a 10-year tax holiday under the STP law, where the investment exceeds 10 million in exports. Where the investment exceeds 10 million. On the service sector, also there are 3 areas identified. Warehousing is to be exempt. So hub operations involving bonded warehouse and warehouses for offshore business is to be exempt from income tax. It's not a holiday as such, but an exemption is what is proposed. Information technology, a 10-year tax holiday under the STP law where investments exceed 10 million. And also the Honorable Minister proposed to build 5 technoparks to encourage the IT sector in Goa, Kurunegala, Batiklo, Anuradhapura and Kandy. Tourism also has been offered a 10-year tax holiday where the investment exceeds 10 million USD. Interesting, there's a simplification of taxes and levies imposed by local government, which is quite rampant. In each local government has a different scheme where hotels have to pay different rates. So that is to be rationalized. And the extension of concessions and recovery of loans granted under refinancing facility by the central bank to be extended until September 30th, 2021. For vocational training, there has been a 5-year tax holiday for entrepreneurs who start their own business on the successful completion of a vocational training course or some education in that regard. There is also to be capital infusion at low interest rates and moratoriums for the startups. Vocational institutes are to get a 5-year tax holiday if the student intake is doubled. So the specifics of that are yet to be known. Right, so the 7th thrust area that we looked at was the capital markets and concessions for the development of the capital market. One such significant change or introduction that happened in July is real estate investment trusts or REITs. So for those of you who are not familiar with this, it is basically, it's like a unit trust, right? Where a trust owns and leases income generating real estate assets, where a lot of investors can invest in this trust, thereby gaining a return. So you don't have to have significant investment to invest in real estate. You can invest in small pockets like unit trusts do in the stock market. You can invest in unit trusts, in REITs to invest in the real estate market. So in other countries, generally, REITs hold office, apartment complexes, buildings, warehouses, hotels, hospitals, etc. So there's a huge scope for this to enhance our real estate market as well. So this has been introduced by Gazette in July, and the framework is stipulated therein. The budget, however, to encourage REITs has offered some exemptions from capital gains tax. It's not specific on what, but generally the capital gains tax would arise on a REIT when the sponsor transfers the real estate to the REIT. So that is one point it can get triggered. The next point is when the REIT transfers real estate out of a REIT to a third party, whether the exemption would apply there, or whether the unit holders of the REIT, when they do sell, whether the capital gains will apply on that, or whether it's on all three, is a question that requires clarity and would help the industry as well if it is clarified at the earliest. REITs are also proposed to be exempt from dividend tax when they do distribute a dividend, and also significantly, there is a 4% stamp duty on the transfer of property to and from a REIT. So there is an exemption to bring that down, or a proposal to bring that down to 0.75%, and we expect that this to apply to the sale to the REIT, where they have to bear the 4%. That will, is proposed to come down to 0.75. So the issue here is, of course, you have the provincial council and the central government, and that will have to be ironed out as to how they are going to get it the same sort of rate in all of the councils. Is something that has to be clarified and passed in each of those statutes. So another concession for the capital markets is the exemption for listing, or the discount in taxation, where 50% tax concession is offered for the years 2021 is provided if you list before December 31st, 2021. Now, it's not mentioned as to how much should be listed or what the public float should be. Earlier, this similar proposal was there, and I think it was 20% that had to be. So this is not clear at the moment. And a concession rate of 14% will also be provided for 3 years if these conditions are met and you list before this particular date, that is December 31st, 2021. There are two concessions on dividend, which is not very clear at the moment, given that foreigners or non-residents are exempt from any dividend received from a Sri Lankan company at the moment. That came into effect from January 1st. So that is something we need clarity on prior to commenting further. Then mega projects. So like I said earlier, the SDP law is to be reinvigorated, or it is to continue, which was not done in the past. So any investment exceeding $10 million with the potential to change the landscape of the economy in the areas of export, industries, dairy, fabric, tourism, agriculture, products, processing and information technology are to be given concessions under the SDP. So we discussed a lot of these, but as you know, the SDP can give concessions up to 25 years. So depending on the contribution to the economy, the application process will have to be done in that light. So the initial submission for an SDP project is to be done through the BOI like it was done earlier. A special economic zone is to be set up in the Colombo port city, and a new legal framework is to be drafted for the governing of the operations of this zone, with exclusions from various taxes and laws. Right, so this is a compilation we did on the corporate tax rates in 2020. If you look at this graph, we have broken it down into Europe and America, and then Asia Pacific. And the corporate tax rates, the highest being France in the Europe and America segment at 31%, and India being the Asia Pacific highest, and Sri Lanka is in the middle with 24% at the moment. So that is a very competitive income tax rate for companies. Personal income tax, however, we are at the lower end, which is a huge, I think, benefit to individuals in Sri Lanka. One of the lowest, with Denmark being 56, and of course Norway at 16. So Sri Lanka is even less than Singapore at 22% on the individual tax. Capital gains tax also, we have the lower rate of 10%, when other countries we have Australia at 30 and Ireland at 33.
This another 2 minutes, please.
Yes. So banking probably proposals for tax administration. There is a tax amnesty that is provided to entrepreneurs, where if a 1% is paid on funds that have not been declared, there is a pardon that is on offer. So that is something to get monies into the formal system. Establishment of a tax appeals court. E-filing being made mandatory from 2021 for all companies. It's optional now, but it's going to be mandatory from next year. A time frame for private rulings and settlement of appeals to expedite the process. NBT and ESC, where there have been unpaid amounts, a settlement mechanism is going to be introduced. And calculation of capital gains are to be streamlined, where the consideration is to be higher of the actual selling price or the assessed value. So we understand that that's not going to change the capital gain structure too much. It's only the consideration that has been changed. VAT and tariffs. So we are moving from 3-tier tariff. The 3-tier is going to continue, but with a significant drop, where the 30% highest rate is going to come down to 15%. So that may have a big benefit to certain luxury products, but they may be compensated with cessors. We don't know at the moment, but that is a significant change in the duty structure that we see. GST also, we are at a rather low rate when compared to other countries at 8%. COVID relief provided so two significant areas. One is a waiver of income tax in arrears payable by SMEs. So all assessments up to 18-19 are to be that have been issued other than fraud and willful neglect. will not be pursued by the department. So what is important, I think, if the department brings this in, is that the system also be updated to that extent. No additional assessments for SMEs for 1920 as well, if the taxes have been paid and returns filed. And a grace period for payment and filing of returns have been given up to December 31st, 2020, where the period was up to June. Between March and June, the compliance, they have given an extension up to December 31st. So with that, I will conclude, Professor, on the areas of the budget or tax. Thank you.
Dilani.
Professor Vattal, will you be taking any questions, or should we proceed along with this? Proceed, yeah. That, ladies and gentlemen, was Mr. Nistar Suleiman, a partner of the tax practice Ernst & Young. Thank you, sir, for your participation and the added value. I now deem it a privilege to invite Ms. Suresh Pereira, Principal Tax and Regulatory, KPMG, for his address on taxation implications on business and society. Mr. Suresh counts over a decade of experience in the areas of tax and regulatory services, including entry and exit planning, domestic and international taxation, investment structuring, mergers and acquisitions, facilitating regulatory and licensing approvals, and representations before appellate authorities in a number of sectors. Mr. Suresh Pereira, the platform is yours.
Thank you for that introduction, and let me begin by thanking Professor Vattal for inviting me to address this gathering. And what I would do is I'll just take 2 minutes. I'm not going to do a PowerPoint presentation. I'll just add or maybe make my observations with regard to the tax proposals and how that will impact the businesses within just 10 minutes. Now, the first observation that I want to make is the biggest change or the immediate hit or the immediate impact that we are going to see in the tax regime. And that's with regard to the introduction of the special GST. Now, what is the special GST? Now, something of this nature took place in India also in 2017. In India, in 2017, as we know, goods and services tax was introduced to replace several taxes, 9 taxes by the central government, and another 6 taxes imposed by state taxes were replaced with a single tax called goods and services tax. But then, of course, that is a tax on value addition. So now what's going to be the nature of this tax that is going to be introduced? And that is going to happen with effect from 1st of January. Is that going to be a tax on value addition, whatever the name that we will be calling it, a special goods and services tax or some other name? Is that going to be a tax on value addition? And tax on value addition is calculated or termed in GST in some countries like Singapore and New Zealand. And in some countries, it's called in the European Union, we find that it's called VAT, and what we have in Sri Lanka also. So is that going to be a tax on value addition? Is that going to be a tax on turnover? Is the first question that we have. And my next observation is 1st of January. Now today is what? Today is basically 23rd of November. We are talking about 5 weeks, 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, we are going to experience one of the biggest changes that we are going to see in the tax regime in Sri Lanka. So is the time sufficient? I keep my fingers crossed to see whether that's possible. Because in India also they struggled a lot to do this replacement. It's not that easy. So it's not just a case of getting the law passed by the parliament, the administrative requirements to implement it. Take it from the point of view of the companies, the businesses. Now businesses during the month of December have to change their computer systems to be compliant with this new tax to be adopted. So I think that's going to be a daunting task, and I think the common sense will prevail, and this date will get extended to implement this. I don't know whether we can do this by the 1st of January. Time is too short. And let me also speak a little bit in relation to the local industries. There are tax concessions. The tax has been used as a tool to grant to promote local industries, no doubt. And we do find basically one such one is basically at the point of any importation. As of now, if any good is any article is not liable for tax, liable for VAT, then local production of that article or the good is also to be exempt from VAT. So what is this? Now here they are trying to create, the policymakers are trying to create the parity. If there's a VAT exemption granted to the importers or for foreign goods, that same exemption, the VAT exemption, is to be extended to the local production, seems to be the intention. Okay, now my question in relation to this is, the exemptions are granted or the VAT is charged on supply of goods and services and on the incidence of importation. So the strictly speaking, production activity is not exactly falling within that ambit. So probably what the policymakers are thinking is that production and the sale, production of a particular good and then sale of that good, and that good will be VAT exempt. Now the question that arises is, what, the first sale, yes, definitely will be exempt. Then what about the second sale? That means the person who is buying from the producer is selling in turn. Is that also going to be except the wholesaler and the retailer? Now that's a question mark that we will have to keep our fingers crossed to see how the government will address that one. And of course, there has been cess introduced to protect the local industries, which is a welcome move from the point of view of the, how do I say, the national outlook. Right, now I do have certain issues in relation to some of the content in the budget speech in relation to certain import duty waivers that have been suggested. Now there is a move to ensure that certain raw materials such as cement, premix, iron rods, bitumen that cannot be produced domestically will be imported in bulk without import duties. So there is a suggestion to grant import duty exemption in relation to cement, which cannot be produced locally. That's what the budget speech is saying. Now, to my understanding, cement is being produced, manufactured in Sri Lanka. So I believe it is adequately manufactured or supplied in Sri Lanka. So in that context, do we need to allow cement to be imported sans any import duties? It's a question mark, because then what's going to be the consequence? The companies that are engaged in production in Sri Lanka can get adversely impacted if this is not, how do I say, looked through properly. That's one aspect of it. Even in relation to iron rods, I think it's the same. I believe it's also being produced in Sri Lanka, but there is a reference to that also in the budget speech. And also there is a reference to something called premix. Premix. Now, what is premix? To me, I'm not sure what exactly it is. I am not sure basically whether in Sri Lanka we do have anything called premix, and what exactly is meant by that is something that we need to look upon. And then also this proposal should not allow room for dumping. That is also another thing that we have to keep in mind. We have to watch out as to how this proposal will get implemented. Right. Third point I want to make is in relation to the contribution to the insurance fund. It's actually not going to be tax, as Suleiman pointed out. It's going to be a contribution to an insurance fund. And the question is, can that be passed on to customers? If that is permitted, will that work like an turnover tax? Will that lead to cascading impact? Because this is going to impact many of the businesses in Sri Lanka, according to the way it is couched in the budget speech. Now, how will this impact the businesses? Now, when you say businesses, you have different types of businesses. Suleiman also touched on that, but I just want to add something specifically in relation to, let's say there are companies, business that are making losses. So they don't have profits, but then if this is introduced, they will still have to pay from their top line 0.25% to the fund, and not the best of the times for them to get exposed to such an experience. And also in relation to the low margin companies, now you take something like retailers, their margins are very low. So now they are also going to find this a little bit inconvenient when it comes to how do I say, complying with. And then the next concept is in relation to the capital gains tax. Now, there is a reference to simplification of the capital gains tax. I do understand that there are, how do I say, complicated or maybe technical issues or maybe practical difficulties in implementing, but then capital gains tax is not a easy tax to implement. Even in countries like India, you can see the revenue collected from capital gains tax is not that great. And in Sri Lanka, if you take the performance report by the Inland Revenue Department, you see the first year, it's almost zero. And the second year, it's 0.06% of the total tax revenue collected. So the question to my mind is in relation to capital gains tax, is that actually bringing any benefit to the country, benefit to the revenue collection process, when you do the cost benefit analysis? Because the moment you say that there is capital gains tax in a country, it's a red flag for the investors, and the investors try to postpone their transactions. So now in that context, I'm not very sure whether trying to do this simplification is the thing that we should be looking at, because there are technical issues with regard to this simplification wording that is given in the budget speech also. It talks of basically the assessed value or the selling price, whichever that is higher, to be the base for calculation. Seems there is no room for deduction of the cost. If that's the case, then this is not going to be a gain. This is not going to be a capital gains tax. Then this is going to be like a turnover tax. So the inequity is a person who has purchased a property, let's say for 20 million, and now he's selling at 18 million at a loss. Now, the way we read this sentence in the budget speech, if that is the interpretation, then that means basically a person who is incurring a loss from the transaction is also called upon to pay this tax. So we have to wait and see how this will work out. And also we have to keep in mind the concept of assessed values is there only in relation to land and building. Now the concept of capital gains tax are not exactly the correct term, but realization on investment assets, it's not confined to land and building. There is a it's applicable on shares, ordinary shares. It's applicable on a partner selling the partnership share, and in case of a trust, and also in case of securities, financial assets, and also options and things that are related to the items that are mentioned in the definition of capital assets. So in relation to some of those like debentures and all that, there's no concept called assessed value. So how are we going to look at it? So here the policymaker has approached this proposal keeping in mind it's only land and building. So I think we need to revisit this entire proposal again from the point of view of implementation as well as from the point of view of the conceptuality. And right now, as Nista pointed out, there are a couple of other issues in relation to the dividends also. There are two proposals in relation to the dividends, but then dividends paid to non-residents from the beginning of the year is free of income tax due to the web notice. Whether these two proposals are proposing to change those, change that position. And I think I was listening to somebody from the government referring to this aspect, and he pointed out that no, he's not going to take out the exemption that was given by the web notice. So I think these two proposals, that means the gradual reduction of tax on dividends paid by multinational companies that are gradually increasing the exports, as well as dividends paid to foreign companies where they will be whether they have been called upon to invest in their businesses in Sri Lanka or in sovereign bonds or stocks to obtain the exemption, I think may not be.
Suresh, we will take up at the discussion time the balance. Okay.
Fine. Yeah, right. From that, and I'll just move on to issue with regard to the tax holidays. Now, this is again another issue. Well, if I'm not mistaken, I think somewhere in 1978, it's with the establishment of the Great Economic Colombo Commission, the concept of tax holidays under the what we call BOI was introduced, and then we saw up to somewhere say 2013 or so, the concept of tax holidays was the norm in the country to attract FDI, and then there was a change of thought, and we decided, or rather basically policymakers tend to move away from the concept of granting tax holidays to attract FDI. But we have to keep in mind that that move or the policy at that time was also not based on scientific research. It's basically a concept, and following the concept, the actions were implemented to curtail or to reduce the number of tax holidays, or to move away from the concept of tax holidays. So what we have in the new Inland Revenue Act now is the concept of enhanced capital allowances and not tax holidays. And now what we see is, okay, we are turning back the clock and we are going back again to tax holidays. So I'm not saying I'm not against or for concept of tax holidays, but I'm trying to point out is basically Sri Lanka needs to have research-based institutions that look at the cost of granting tax holidays, and then based on the results where we act, and not just the notions. And can I take another 1 or 2 minutes?
Yeah, soon.
Right, okay. I'll from there I'll move on to this amnesty issue. Now, in this budget proposal, there is a reference to bring the hidden money or the undeclared money, so that there will be a 1% tax on that, and no, I would say no questions asked kind of proposal here. Right now, background to this is basically, not the background, but what we have to keep in mind is in the Foreign Exchange Act also, Section 8 of the Foreign Exchange Act has amnesty in relation to funds undeclared and kept out of Sri Lanka. And if that funds are pertaining to funds undeclared prior to November 20th, 2017, that's the time the Exchange Control Act, Foreign Exchange Act was introduced. Before that, then those funds could be brought to Sri Lanka, and there's amnesty mentioned in the Foreign Exchange Act, but not in the Inland Revenue Act or any other tax statutes. And certain documentation in relation to implementation of this scheme has also been introduced. So now, what is the difference between that scheme and this scheme? Now, this scheme is not confined to funds prior to 2017, and also not only in relation to the funds that are kept abroad. This could be undeclared profits in or outside Sri Lanka. And most important thing is the amendment should come to the Inland Revenue Act or the tax statute, and not in any other statute. So I think that hopefully this will clear doubts if there are in relation to the current system or current scheme that is there in the Foreign Exchange Act. And right, so can I stop it there, and then we'll move on to the panel discussion?
Fine, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Suresh Pereira, Principal Tax and Regulatory, KPMG. Moving on to another important discussion, we are happy to have with us today Dr. Nishan Dimel, CEO, Vit Research Private Limited, to speak about the economic implication of the Budget Proposals 2021. He's an economist with extensive academic, policy, and private sector experience. We are indeed blessed to hear from you today, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lakshman Watawala, for the invitation. And great to be with such a wonderful set of people, I think, giving views on the budget today. Let me just begin by sharing my screen, and so that we can start our conversation. Thank you very much. So I think this is a much awaited budget, because the last year has been tough with COVID. There was a lot of ad hoc policies that had to be followed to function without a budget for the year 2020. And I think the 2021 budget, therefore, is an important milestone for the country. In understanding the budget, I think many of the representations made so far are very important, very useful, and I thank everybody who made them. what I want to do is focus on, I think, perhaps the professionalism of the budget process, and what we can learn and perhaps even advise looking at the budget on how we can improve the professionalism of the budgeting process, because the budget in any country is a critical element of the management of the country's policies and economic outcomes. If you get the budgeting wrong, you're likely to get misdirected, both in policy terms and in terms of economic outcomes. And this has been a feature of Sri Lanka for a long time, that budgets can be very optimistic, budgets can fail to have appropriate analysis, and therefore the planning process that comes out of a budget doesn't meet reality, and then things tend to go seriously wrong as you go forward. Focusing on professionalism, I'll look at three areas, I think, together with the budget, and these are not new problems. They are problems that have existed for a while. One is relating to information. Second is relating to the coherence, that is the internal consistency of the budget. And third is relating to stability of policy, as we might be able to discern from the budget itself. I think I'm going to go straight through without taking questions, but I think certainly if Lakshman Watawala wants to stop me at any point and ask for any clarifications, you're welcome to do that. So one of the things that I think is quite critical when we look at a budget is we want to see the estimates of the policies that have been declared in the budget. So there are revenue policies, there are expenditure policies that are stated in the budget speech, in the budget itself. And what makes a budget as opposed to kind of a policy statement or a political manifesto is that you've got to put your money where your mouth is. So you've got to match the policies or the ideas that you present with an estimates of revenue or estimates of expenditure to make sure that this is a budget, this is not something else. Now here's something that Sri Lanka often struggles with. In 2019, we counted 11 revenue proposals that had no attached estimates of how much the government actually intended to earn from that revenue proposal. In 2021, we've counted 36 revenue proposals that have no monetary estimate. So the revenue proposals there, but the government seems not aware of what it will actually earn through that revenue proposal, which makes the budgeting process, I would say, non-professional in that sense, right? So in a professional budget, we really know that our numbers add up, and therefore we are able to make estimates. Now, estimates don't come out perfectly right all the time, but working with the best estimates you have gives you some clarity and control over the total numbers that you project for the future, even in a one-year period. So these are just some examples of the kind of revenue proposals that don't have a matching estimate of what we expect to get in terms of revenue as a result of the changes. And there are very, very significant revenue changes and proposals that have been put forward. I'm not going to cycle through all 36 of them, but that's just to give an example. Now we see the same problem with regard to, I think, the expenditure estimates. In 2019, we counted 3 expenditure estimates that didn't have matching estimates, expenditure proposals that didn't have matching estimates of what that would cost. In 2021, we've counted 32 expenditure proposals that don't have matching estimates. So once again, there's a policy, but the budget aspect of that policy is missing, because what makes, I think, again, something a budget rather than a manifesto is that we know how much the government expects to spend when they put forward an expenditure proposal, and the proposal is somehow contained within those expectations. So again, these are examples, and again, I'm not going to cycle through all 32 of those examples, but there are a large number. Now, this is not something that Verite Research itself has observed. The Committee on Public Finance, which is a parliamentary committee, has observed this in the past. And if you read the past COPEF reports, Committee on Public Finance, we call it COPEF, you see quite a lot of analysis that gives feedback to Parliament to say that the budgeting process is weak in terms of professionalism and the numbers provided to Parliament. The current Committee on Public Finance, I think the configuration was changed, so it is now chaired by a government member of Parliament rather than opposition member of Parliament as in the past. Nevertheless, in its annex, the COPEF report does point out to many issues with revenue expectations and other expectations that don't have matching estimates or where sufficient information is not available. Now, this is important because the Committee on Public Finance has a greater access to the Ministry of Finance. So they do this report after consulting the ministry directly outside of the reports and other documents to say, what else can you provide us? Can you provide us any further information with regard to the budget? They have an extensive template that they ask the ministry to fill out. And even after doing all that, they conclude that sufficient information is not available on various factors. Again, you should read the report and really the annexes on the report is where much of the meat of the report is. And these are examples of areas where the COPEF says that not only do they say sufficient information is not available, in some parts of the annexes, the report says that, in fact, the projections are very far from what they can expect to be credible. So I'll come back to that because a non-professional budgeting process, I think, leads to a significant problem of credibility and believability. Do we actually have the ability to have confidence in what the budget presents becomes the critical question when information is not available. And I think this is something that everybody looking at the budget from an analytical, professional perspective finds to be difficult to figure out. So just one last example, I think on the information side, there has been a significant discussion about the 2019 a deficit that was presented by the budget. So the budget said that, the budget speech said that the deficit in 2019 was not 6.8, as it is actually stated in the central bank annual reports and confirmed by the Auditor General, but that it was over 9%. Now, the problem there again is, I think, perhaps a professionalizing problem, and it's perhaps worth discussing that here because today is a forum of professional accountants, that the accounting method used to move 6.8 to above 9% was seriously problematic because Sri Lanka follows a cash-based accounting method. And on the cash-based accounting method, you have to keep consistency of how you account year over year. And you can't simply change one year and not change other years as has been done. And also, even if you actually switch from the cash-based method, the numbers don't add up. And even if you did, get the correct numbers on a non-cash-based method, you can't simply do it for expenditure, which is what was done to get the higher deficit. You have to do it then for revenue also, which wasn't done. So overall, I think this problem of, reporting numbers that then turn out to lack credibility and clearly don't follow accounting or a reporting standard that is consistent, sometimes just simply don't have the assumptions to justify the numbers. I think these are serious problems for a professional budget. And what this means is that if we corrected the way of accounting, the government, even though it projects a number of just under 8% for the budget deficit for 2021, is effectively projecting a budget deficit of over 11%, or about 11% for 2021. But this is not in the public domain or known. But if you fix the numbers, then you get a very different reality, even on the proposed plan going forward. And I think that means that, reading the budget and trying to plan or understand or make decisions for the private sector on the budget it requires a second layer of analysis of the budget because to understand the budget, the assumptions, the numbers are both not available and perhaps could also be misrepresented in certain ways, which is what is coming out. And I think, again, even the Committee on Public Finance that consults the government, the Auditor General, will be forced to conclude that this is the real problem that exists in the budget that is being put before Parliament and the public. Let me take you through some of the coherence problems, because even when the numbers are there, I think they're difficult to make sense of. I mean, sometimes it is really quite a simplistic coherence problem. So this is the difference in the numbers in the budget speech as spoken by the Prime Minister and the budget speech annex that actually gives all the numbers in tables and other forms. So you can see that the numbers differ on very important, simple things like government revenue, government expenditure. Of course, some differences are very small on this deficit number. So you don't always get the same number, but much more significantly, between the budget estimates, which are the detailed calculations presented to Parliament, and the budget speech, there are very large discrepancies that are not reconcilable. Again, this is not a new observation. If you go back year on year, and the Committee on Public Finance reports are a good source, you can see that this problem has existed previously, and these same problems continue to exist. So I think what is perhaps worth understanding is not that this budget is significantly more problematic, it may be in some areas, than past budgets, but that it continues the unprofessional approach to budgeting that we were really hoping that the current president and this government would be committed to trying and address, and perhaps they will be able to do it a year later. They certainly haven't been able to achieve that at this point. So the consequence of making these kinds of projections that are incorrect or based on assumptions that are flawed or not available is that what you actually project and what comes true is always different. So these are the deviations in government revenue, deviations in expenditure, and deviations in budget balances from what's projected in a budget. And these over a long period of time from 2009 onwards. And what you can see is that, revenue always falls well short. So it's not a statistical error, because when you make a statistical error, you have deviation around the mean. So sometimes it's a little higher, sometimes it's a little lower. These are consistent unidirectional error, both in expenditure and in revenue, but expenditure error changes when it's an election year sometimes. So in election years, the expenditure errors either come down or they go in the opposite direction because the government tends to overspend. So there's a predictability in budgeting that you can be fairly sure that the budgeting is consistently inaccurate in a particular direction. So really the task of being maybe smart private sector business leaders is to understand what the magnitude of errors are that you can expect in a budget. How do you correct for them, and how do you reinterpret for yourself a budget that is more likely to be what the outcome is? Because history tells us that if you believe the budget, then you're being quite naive in terms of how you set your expectations. But of course, lots of analysis has been done. We presented this in many, many years over and over. So there are ways to actually understand what the real outcomes could be over what is presented in a budget. And unfortunately, that's what I think we have to do if you're to make policy and decisions for the future of business and development in Sri Lanka. Now, just to talk about coherence and the magnitude of these coherence problems, Verite does its own estimates on some of these income taxes, the goods and services taxes, external trade. And what you see on the right-hand side column is the deviations that we think will be between what actually will happen and what is provided in the budget. So you can see we expect on income tax of 49, what's provided as estimate is 49% higher than what will probably be achieved. 29% higher, 21% higher, 37% higher, 27%. So these are very, very large deviations. And we know that, over experience, we know that our estimates are probably right. We've done these estimates before, and often our estimates have come to within 10% of what is actually the actual outcome, whereas government budgets have deviated by magnitudes of this sort. And once again, if you go back to the Committee on Public Finance reports in the past, you can read the documentation of these deviations. And so again, this is not new to this present budget. It is just evidence of Sri Lanka running perhaps unprofessional system in presenting budgets to Parliament and society. So these are again, by how much different types of taxes tend to change from the estimates. Let me just make sure that I'm following the path. So these now are the medium-term fiscal framework set out in the budget from 2019 to 2023. They look obviously very optimistic, very positive, and they look like the future is good. One of the exercises we've done in the past, I'm not going to do it today, is to show how no medium-term framework ever presented by government is mapped out in the way that it is presented. It always comes out quite significantly in the opposite direction or hugely deviated. So in a sense, medium-term deviations are not very helpful from a budgeting process unless it's calculated independently. Now, this is an independent calculation we have on the debt to GDP ratio. You can see that here it's assumed to come to 75%. We have a calculation that it can't come below 100% or will be hovering around 100% even at 2025. And these are on really rather generous positive assumptions also that we noted on the right-hand side. So if you do the numbers for yourself and make assumptions even on an optimistic end of the spectrum. So for instance, we are expecting only a negative 4.4% GDP growth for 2020. In reality, that expectation was crafted prior to the second wave of COVID that we are seeing now. So the actual GDP numbers could be significantly lower. And yet it's very difficult to find a set of assumptions that can even be banked upon or worked upon that would assume that debt to GDP ratio could come down. And likewise, what we can see here is that revenue to GDP has been coming down over a long period of time. And even when real GDP growth goes up, the black bars in the middle, we can see that in Sri Lanka, the increase in GDP growth is not associated with higher revenue to GDP. In fact, revenue to GDP falls when GDP growth increases. It's only during a short period after 2015 that we saw the revenue to GDP increase because of tax measures and sustaining, and those tax measures had an increasing impact. Revenue to GDP has still come down a little bit over the last few years, and currently it is below 10%. So really, it is going to be very difficult to expect the revenue to GDP numbers revenue to GDP to increase, even though there's a projection of revenue to GDP going up to 14%. The revenue measures that will achieve it are not available. And in fact, this leads to a sort of question about the stability of policy, because when the government guarantees that the existing current taxes will remain as they are, then that would, you can't square that guarantee with the expectation of revenue to GDP increasing. And of course, we'll come back to the stability problem that results from that. And you can see that even, the deficit financing comes at a cost. Even on taxes on external trade, now there is an assumption that taxes on external trade will go up. But we know that this is not easy, because the budget is done on exchange rate that doesn't depreciate below 185. Keeping exchange rate below 100 at that level requires balance of payments to be managed, which can only be managed by Sri Lanka running what we call the small closed economy model. That means you have to have a very strong restriction on imports. So you can't, at the same time, have one assumption that says you have a very strong restriction on imports, and another assumption that says, that the import, there's a relaxation in imports, and revenue from taxing imports goes up. So you notice this contradiction even within the budget numbers and the budget speech, where there is a commitment to maintain import restrictions on one side, and even a commitment to increase government capex. And what you see on the right-hand side is government capex usually drives up external balances or causes balance of payment problems, because much of government capex leads to imports as well on infrastructure. So once again, it's the coherence problem that the things that are said within the budget can't be made to add up. They don't sit well together. So you can't have a fix of the revenue measures or the taxation measures, expect revenue to go up. You can't have your exchange rate stability, and you can't have taxes on imports go up. These things don't work well together. So in a sense, I think we might expect reasonably a lot of policy inconsistency, even if it comes under a different name. Now, we know that the pay taxes were abolished in January 2020, but then you had advanced personal income tax introduced in April 2020, which is effectively doing the same thing under another name and under a different way of administrating it and reporting it. So this is just an example, I think, and I think Suresh and others mentioned how while VAT is taken off, you can have a cascading tax that comes as a revenue on top of overall revenue that has a huge impact then on businesses and adding on cost to businesses and taxes in a way that is now very difficult to understand the impact. But in a sense, it's compensating for the removal of the VAT and coming in under a different name. So what you see here is, I think, the risk of a lot of inconsistency because or instability in the policies, because government will have a very serious problem with regard to revenue. That problem does need to be addressed. The deficits are likely to remain above 10% for the foreseeable future on the expenditure trajectory that the government has mapped out, because the revenue trajectory simply cannot meet those expectations. And when you try to adjust the revenue trajectory, there will have to be a lot of ad hoc changes in the taxation and other revenue mechanisms that the country has. Now, we think this is unfortunate from a professional point of view, because the whole, as Suresh pointed out, I think the whole reason to set up laws and to kind of fix exemptions and make a rule-based taxation policy rather than one that changed in every budget. So I think what we saw in maybe 10 years, 15 years ago, and over a long time, is that every budget changed the set of incentives. So you couldn't confidently bank on a set of incentives and go into that industry because it could change in 1 year. And this is because every budget created different priorities, different problems, and you just didn't know what government did. And even the incentives didn't work as incentives ultimately because they became non-credible. So setting up a set of laws, and which is what was done with the New England Revenue Act, to make exemptions rule-based and very difficult to change, that you can't change them in a budget speech, you have to change the law. Now, unfortunately, what we've seen after 2019 is that the law has been not given a very high priority. There were a lot of changes that were made that were not valid in law, but due to COVID, due to other manifesto exigencies, these were still implemented, and they were made into valid in law in some way only about a few weeks ago by passing certain acts in Parliament. So in a sense, the government has demonstrated the ability to act irrespective of what the law is. And these are some examples. And even today, based on the budget, it means quite a few of the Inland Revenue Act clauses need to be amended, including for VAT, you will require changing laws. So what's been set out in the budget speech, what's even been implemented, actually isn't conforming with law. It will require laws to be changed. But when you change laws too easily, and this is done even with the Fiscal Management Responsibility Act, suddenly, the credibility of even having a law is reduced. So when you can't expect policymakers and say politicians to act in a credible, systematic way, you try to codify things in law. But when you have a parliament that is quite happy to change law whenever the law is inconvenient and does it often, then not only do you lose credibility, you lose your mechanisms for credibility. So it's a second order loss of credibility. And it's very hard to then know how you can build confidence either for investors or for the private sector, because things can, it seems, change too easily too often. And I think even though there is a political economy theory that says strong government can give stability, in Sri Lanka, what we found over a very long period of time is that strong governments don't lead to stability in policy, because it becomes easier to make quick changes in policy with less consultation and less analysis critically. If you think about it, all these changes to the VAT, to the PAY, happened without a single analytical document or a piece of research or analysis in the Ministry of Finance that showed that these changes were beneficial for the country. So, and it's very confusing because the same Ministry of Finance that if it were professional had gone through a process of advising policymakers that VAT had to increase, other taxes had to increase, and this was the way that Sri Lanka was going to gain stability and move forward, within 2 months of an election, decide that all of them have to be reversed drastically in a different direction, and is unable to provide any analysis in either direction. So if there is no professional mechanism for making these decisions, that means it is vulnerable to kind of political, ad hocism of what somebody who is powerful thinks is right, without actually consultation and analysis. And that can lead to reduced professionalism and increased confusion. And I think in a way, it's unfortunate, it's not new, that for all the informational problems that exist, both due to lack of information, incorrect information, for the coherence problems that exist, that even within the budget documents, things are not the same. What's said in one document is different from another, and the numbers don't add up. What is said as being achieved on one side, the math doesn't work with the assumptions and the promises on the other side. And what all this means and shows is that there is a lot of instability in budget making and policy making in Sri Lanka. And in this budget cycle, at least, that problem is not addressed because there is still no evidence of a professional process of evaluation analysis in setting up the budget to be a credible document that we can think forward. So as accountants, I think all of y'all and I think the majority here may be accountants, have an enormous role to play in asking for more credible accounting standards to be followed. But also economists have an enormous role to play in asking for analysis on budget and assumptions and analysis and information to make sure that what's put in the budget is credible. But as private sector leaders, I think smart leaders must know how to read the budget differently from what is said in the budget to what is implied by the way in which the budget actually presents itself in the way I've described. So reading the budget and understanding how to navigate in an environment requires a little bit of smartness outside of simply accepting what the numbers say and what is said in the words of the budget, because you have to really look at the numbers, and that's what makes it a budget. And if the numbers don't add up and square up, then we have to re-understand how we interpret the budget. So let me stop my comments there, and thank you very much for the invitation to the association and Professor Vatabala also.
Thank you, Dr. Nishandi Mel, CEO, Vit Research Private Limited. Our agenda for the day also has a discussion on the budget 2021 and its impact on business, heralded by Dr. D.K. Rajapaksha, Emeritus Managing Director of the PSI Samson Group. Over to you, Dr. Rajapaksha.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me.
Yeah, okay,
We can.
As previous speakers have touched on tax matters extensively, my task is to present how all these budget proposals,
Dr. Nishan, if you can remove the share screen,
affect the benefit of business community. It is normal that the business community always expect ways and means of increase their bottom line. So I will be expressing the pulse of the business community after the budget. With regards to proposals, many of them have already implemented. Tax proposals already have been implemented from 1st of January 2002. And we are very happy there are no new tax proposals. So business community is very happy because of that. As far as the SME is concerned, government accepted that is the backbone of the economy. So therefore, SME sector should be looked after. I think Professor Vattavella through a CMA has aired many times that SME sector to be recognized and definition of SME sector should be cleared by IRA. The understanding that we have is turnover of 750 million be considered as SME. And our proposal, we have been proposing that all these tax proposals to make SME sector totally tax-free if the revenue is less than 750 million. It's not worthwhile opening a tax file for a revenue of less than 750 million per annum. So these are the areas that we have been working. And unfortunately, the budget has not touched much on SME sector. They have touched on dairy sector. They have given a lot of incentives to the dairy sector. Dairy sector is another area that we can develop because there are a lot of huge amount of foreign exchange being utilized to import milk powder. And there's a proposal to give tax up to 10 years. I know the figure is, I don't know, some in one place they mentioned 10 million, another place they mentioned 25 million US dollars. The intention is to reduce import of milk powder and promote local liquid milk production. However, there's a guaranteed price for liquid milk and milk powder price is also controlled. For some unknown reason, even though there's an increase in liquid milk production, there's an increase in import of powdered milk. So that has to be looked into as to why the increase has taken place in spite of the fact that there has been an increase of liquid milk production. Of course, you know, increasing of the restriction of import of milk powder, I understand that there are some international agreements where the control is restricted, but these areas must be looked into because with the COVID situation, there are a lot of unemployment coming through tourism sector and even from migrant workers. So therefore, this is one area where they can be accommodated because dairy industry has a vast opportunities. Of course, through the budget, there's a facility given to buy cows, loan facility being given to buy cattle. That's a good move because when you buy a cattle, you not only get milk, but there are a lot of other benefits that you are getting to the agriculture industry. So therefore, that's a good step in the right direction. But the question here is, we should not allow the milk production to increase and ultimately end up in a situation that they can't sell the liquid milk because liquid milk, if you can't sell it within one day, you have to throw it away. It has happened even before. We must ensure that that doesn't happen again. Then they have banned the import of batik and they have given incentives for cottage industries such as eco brooms and brooms, etc., and even rubber products from the cottage industries. But only thing is they have not elaborated what sort of incentives will be given to these industries because the biggest problem the SME sector having is the marketing. It's not the manufacturing, it's the marketing. In the case of handicrafts, they have put up Luxella to market their products. But in the case of other products, there's no proper arrangement because they are handicapped with the working capital. Therefore, there must be a system that their end products are brought by government institution, probably the CWE, and they get cash promptly. Right now, what happens is, although the small time manufacturers, they have to depend on the buyers and work on 60 days or 90 days trade. So that is not practicable for them to the development. Then there's another proposal on reduction of duty on machines. I don't understand from the business point of view, duty on machines. Already, even now, all imported machines for the manufacturing industry is on zero rated. So they say with modern technology, it will be zero rated, but right now, all types of machinery is governed by GHS code, is duty free. So there is we don't understand what does mean by making import tax free. There are no other tax other than the duty. Then cess of import and export items. That's a good move to protect local industries. But the question is, even exports, they are put up, there will be a cess, and even imports, there are cesses. But this cess must be administrated because cess, already there's a cess available for tea and rubber and even gems. But this cess fund must be properly administrated and plowed back to the same sector to develop that sector. But that is not happening. So I hope the government will consider using this cess fund to develop that particular industry or the sector. Then contribution to the insurance fund, the 0.25% of the turnover, Mr. Suresh mentioned about this. Even though we see the figures used to be 0.25, it's based on the turnover. This is a sizable amount when we come to the turnover point of view. And more than that, we are heading to a simplification of taxes. This is also not going to be another indirect tax. So that means the companies will have to employ clerical staff to handle this tax. And even if the company is running at a loss, this we have to pay. So therefore it's a burden. And we have already given a lot of taxes that we have been facing even before. Economic service charge, gift tax, wealth tax, estate duty, advanced corporate tax, NBT, all that we have given away. But there's another tax item that has come up. I mean, this may be a requirement, but they have mentioned that it's related to the number of employees. If it is related to the number of employees, they should immediately incorporate into the ETF without burdening the companies to have another tax item. The moment you have a tax item, there are tax queries coming up on that particular item as well. So therefore, I think it should have been made simplified by adding to existing tax item or like EPF or something like that. Then undeclared funds, of course, Mr. Suresh mentioned. This has been there even before, but it was not successful. But this time they have implemented a different manner. Hope that bribery department will not look into this much, so that the funds may come and make investment in the for the investments. With regard to the retirement age, I had to mention that this seems to be. It was mentioned that we have to increase the retirement age because of the age limits are increased because of the good medical conditions. Our lifetime is increasing. It's true, but the question here is this retirement age has a lot of bearings on the large factories, because many employees they wait to retire to collect the EPF, ETF, gratuity, etc., and use those funds to educate their children and various other capital investments. But now suddenly this has gone up from 50 years to females to 60 years. There's a fairly long period. If this is not mandatory, it's okay. But right now, no one would think that private sector, the moment they find that there are competent people in the industry, they normally get them engaged again on a contractual basis. So therefore, there is no question of just sending them home. Those who are efficient, those who are capable, always get openings in various factories or various institutions. It's not a question of just staying at home, but there are cases where as the period of service increases, naturally the salary level also goes up. Even unproductive workers, after 55 years, we may have to keep them if it make mandatory. Therefore, I think it seems to be a little bit burden to the large companies, especially where they employ a large number of workers. With regard to startups, they have mentioned that those who have completed TV vocational training, they will be given a loan of 500,000 rupees to start a business, and that will be tax-free for 5 years. A loan of 500,000 rupees to start a business is a very small amount. I don't think they will ever make a profit out of it to make it tax-free, because that will fall into a semi-category. I mean, on the budget speech, of course, it will be very rosy, but the only thing is, in practice, with 500,000 loan, very, very small business can be started. So that also, a few years, they will not make profit. Even if you make a profit, it will not be taxable. That taxable level is making the steep. That's a rather cumbersome procedure, lot of documentation and customs is also involved. So extending
there seems to be a problem. I think Dr. Rajapaksa, is there any problem or? Okay, what we will do.
Fun.
Okay, right. You have a problem with the connection. Yeah.
Yeah, now the turmeric, ginger and turmeric, no, a lot of people are now growing turmeric. On the understanding that they can fetch same price now. But once the government start again trying that they can't sell turmeric. So they must now itself mention that it will not be 5,000, but come down to 300, 400 rupees a kilo once the crop comes in. So therefore, this good must be given to farmers so that they will not end up in another crisis. Then there's another item that have been prevailed, research and development. In previous budgets, there were concessions, the triple reduction of tax on the research.
I think we will now go to the next one because there seems to be a problem. Dilani, can you announce? Yeah.
Yes, yes. Next on agenda is a panel discussion moderated by Mr. Duminda Hulangamua, Head of Tax Partner Ernst & Young, and the Deputy Vice Chairperson of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Joining us as panelists are Mr. N.R. Rajendran, Senior Partner at Gajma & Company, Mr. Vish Govindasamy, Vice Chairperson of the Ceylon Chamber of Commerce and the Group Managing Director of Sunshine Holdings PLC, Mr. D.R.S. Hapuarachi, Deputy Commissioner General, Tax Policy, Legislation and International Affairs at the Department of Inland Revenue, Mr. Kanishka Veerasinghe, Director General of the Employers Federation of Ceylon, Mr. Hasita Premaratna, Group Finance Director of Brandix Lanka Limited, Mr. Sridhar Mithapala, Past President of the Hotels Association of Sri Lanka, Dr. Chandranath Amarasekara, Director Economic Research at the Central Bank of Sri Lanka, and Mr. Dimanta Seneviratna, Director, Group Chief Executive Officer of the National Development Bank, PLC. Over to you, Mr. Duminda Hulangamua.
It's my pleasure to conduct this moderation. And can you hear me, Mr. Watavala?
Yeah, yeah, okay, fine, fine, everything is fine. If everyone
so may I, yes, our panel has been in line for a long time. So sorry that we have to be scheduled. We have exactly 1 hour of the panel discussion. So before I start the questions from the panel, may I invite the panel, if they so wish, to give about 3 minutes briefing sorry, of their view on the 2021 budget. May I start with Mr. Gajendra, please?
Thank you, Duminda. I think a lot have been said on the budget, and the presenters have covered various issues. One point which may be required to be focused and we may not be aware, other than the element of window dressing that has coming into the budget as articulated by Mr. Dimel, is end of the day, who is responsible for this? Who is accountable to achieve these numbers? Because I think the subjects that are listed under the minister, I wouldn't know whether finance ministry and the revenue departments are a subject under him. So if it is not the case, who will be accountable? Because this is going to be very crucial year as it is, because these numbers have to be achieved. So that's a matter that is point of concern for me at this point of time. Thank you.
That's very short, Gaj. Right. I know you'll have a lot of things to say, but let's take it up in more detail later. May I now invite Mr. My friend, Mr. Vish Govindasamy, Vice Chairman, Ceylon Chamber of Commerce. Vish, can you give your views of the budget I wanted to particularly touch on two aspects which, with your involvement in plantations and your involvement with the Employees Federation, the two areas that, or you might take up the question session, but you're already prepared for something else. But later on, maybe I want to ask those two questions. So what do you wish?
Yeah, thanks, Davinder, and thanks, Professor Wattawala, for having me here on this panel. I think a lot has been said, like you said, since last Wednesday on the budget, and I've also been on two panels with the Honorable Minister. So one thing I can say, I think the private sector is generally okay with the taxes not being touched. I think some consistency, because I think overall there was a great expectation for the taxes to go up, and meddling with that would have just set us back completely. So I have to say, in that sense, it's a good thing. The entire tax segment has been left alone for the most part. I think that's a good thing. Where I see huge challenges, Davinder, is in the revenue side. We even with the good years, collecting the revenue has been a huge challenge. Now with the reduced VAT, reduced tax regime, not sure how it's all going to play out. I'm very happy there is a huge capex on infrastructure development. As a private sector, from the chamber, I think it's a great initiative. I don't know if we'll be back to the trap of so many construction companies not being paid, etc. I think we have been through that era. So, those are the concerns of this budget. Healthcare, given a pandemic, I don't see a huge emphasis on building infrastructure in the healthcare sector. While there is a lot of incentive to build manufacturing facilities, etc., those take time. Just to register a drug from scratch to making it in Sri Lanka will take approximately 2 years. So until such time, I think there are some huge infrastructure requirements in the rural sector when it comes to hospitalization, even having ICU beds, etc. I didn't see anything significantly mentioned in those areas. Particularly to your question, I think I've already gotten in hot water for making my comments on the plantation wage bit. I don't think a wage should be part of a budget, but it's now there's a lot of debate on it. So let's wait and see. On the EFC point of view, adjusting the private sector age limit to 60. We always felt it's something that should be contractual and not legislated. That should be employer-employee, something that is contractual. If the employer wants to keep somebody till 60, so be it. And it should be performance-based, productivity-based, can't be legislated. Why not 70, 75? In many countries in Europe, people are working till 75. That's because that's a contractual obligation between the employer and employee, not by legislation. So I think those are the issues, and I'm sure we'll get questions, and I'll be happy to answer during that. Thank you.
Thanks, Vish, for being as articulate as usual. May I now turn to our first government speaker. Representing the government is Mr. D.R.S. Happawarachi, Deputy Commissioner General Inland Revenue. Mr. Happawarachi might be able to answer some of the policy questions that were raised, if these are clarified by now. Or else, from a department's point of view, the Inland Department was featured quite a lot in this budget speech of the Prime Minister, from reforms to amnesties to tax moratoriums, etc. So, Mr. Happawarachi, is it possible for you to give your view on the budget 2000? Very briefly, about 3 minutes of what your view is and what the department's role is in terms of implementing budget 2021.
Thanks, Davinder. Of course, we were talking a lot about trying to have a consistent policy about previous days where we were participating in this type of panel discussions. Of course, it has been, I don't say that it is, of course, on all proposals, so all matters coming under this budget, it has been tried, but actually when the government introduced a package of tax concessions after coming into power, of course, I think those things have not been changed. So the continuation is there. So we can have the understanding that to a certain extent, the policy consistency has been, or the continuity has been maintained. Okay, then as you asked about our views of the inland revenue, actually there's a double impact of on the revenue generation with, having such a policy and also given the present situation in the COVID-19 pandemic. Of course, another thinking about this, sometimes we are talking about broadening the tax base and getting the revenue. We have to understand that at the moment, policy is not keeping with broadening the tax base. So policy is, of course, thinking about the future benefits, right? So having such a policy for a certain period of time in the midterm and long term, the expectation is that, according to the theory, I don't know, it will be the same in our country. We are thinking about savings, investments, and employment generation, and of course, having sort of good things in that way. So it was announced at the outset. So continuity is, of course, maintained as such. And regarding the revenue, I think still we can try to achieve revenue. We are, I think, around 64%, last week. Of the target timing, but still we are having some issues, generating from the present situation. And as a major revenue proposal, although there are some doubts of implementation and other things like how it will be announced, the special GST, SGST is, of course, going to play a big role about revenue generation, as I understand. So those are my initial remarks about the budget 2021 taxation proposals.
Thank you, Mr. Habwarachi. May I now go to Mr. Kanishka Virasinghe of the Regional Employee Federation to give his views on the budget 2021. Kanishka, you can also mention about special about this employees' age. In my view, I did want to contest the minister, but I don't think it's legislated now. So please give your views plus your clarifications on those EPF and the plantation wage matter, please.
Thank you, Duminda. I think I must also say that my chairman, Mr. Govindasamy, touched on that. I'm sure in his capacity as EFC chairman, he will also take the liberty of supplementing or adding to what I say. Yes, and I think Dr. Nishan Limel also touched on this aspect, Duminda, that sometimes, factually, there are certain issues that have to be looked at. One of the things that it's in that's in the budget speech is that it goes on record to say that we have the private sector has a retirement age for females of 50 and 55 for males, and that's not factually accurate, because we all know that it's the retirement ages in companies is the same for men and women. Of course, it could vary from 55 to 60, but women do have the option of retiring early. But most don't do that nowadays, other than in the case of the manufacturing sector, because they do that, and that's for the purpose of withdrawing their superannuation funds. So those proposals are there in the related. Actually, they relate to the EPF Act or the Provident Fund Act, and it doesn't have anything to do with retirement age. I listened carefully to Dr. Artigala, and also gleaned from his presentations that these are two different aspects, and the government is not going to, or at least they are going to have a different approach. So we need to first clarify from our minister, the labor minister, and I'm happy that we have a senior minister who is competent and who also accommodates discussion before him. First and foremost, we want to sort of find out what the government proposals are and have an approach there. But it's also important that the government comes up with factually correct figures, because otherwise when you place something like this on record, it'll appear as if we are discriminating against men and women. So and there are so many other ILO conventions and things like that we have signed, and we need to be consistent with our presentations. The other thing is that my chairman touched on this, so I don't think I need to touch on the policy issues of the EFC, but also the issue of mandating wages, because this can have a knock-on effect quite apart from the plantations. It can have a knock-on effect on the other industries, and also things like collective bargaining, because there have been a long-standing collective agreement, for instance, in the plantation sector, and this is considered as a model even by the ILO. So this can have a serious implication on things like collective bargaining, where Sri Lanka is supposed to promote collective bargaining, and also mandating wages is not going to help us, especially for the private sector. As you know, we have had so many issues with regard to the last one, which came in 2016, and even before that in 2005. We have still yet to overcome those implications. So we sincerely hope that the government will consult the stakeholders before finalizing any of these proposals, and certainly implementing them. Thank you, Duminda.
Thank you, Kanishka. May I now ask Mr. Hasitha Premaratna. Hasitha, you're online?
Yes, Duminda. Hi.
Hi, Hasitha. Nice to see you after a long time. And of course, you're in a very, very competitive, at least challenging environment today, with exports to other countries, with demand probably not dwindling, but margins eroding. So what are your views, Hasitha? How does it help the garment industry as a whole? Were you expecting more than this in the budget for the garment industry, as one of the largest sectors and industry of the country that is contributing significantly to the national economic progress of this country, employment, everything? Did you expect more than this, or are you satisfied, or there's avenues to grow from a budget 2021 point of view?
Yeah, thanks, Davinda. Thanks, Professor Vatawala. So I think from a industry perspective, if you look at the budget proposals and the implications, in general, exports have seen quite a bit of interesting areas being covered. I mean, a lot of prominence given through the speech, being referred many a times, looking at different industries, etc. But I think the most significant piece for me here is actually there are two things I would like to touch on. One is if you look at the trade agreements, because this is something that have been spoken about for many years, and diversifying our exports beyond the Western countries, Europe and US, and looking at India, looking at China, looking at Japan, etc. So that side of the conversation, to be more competitive in that arena, to fight with the rest of the manufacturing countries, we were talking about these trade agreements for some time. So I'm quite happy to see that it's been mentioned in the budget itself, have been pursued forward as a strategy by the new government as well, where India, China in particular being covered, and also maybe looking at Japan and a few other countries that have been listed. So that's a interesting dynamic, because no matter what we do from different incentive perspective, also from export angle, when you look at being competitive is quite vital as a country. So that competitiveness, this is not necessarily only on apparel that I'm talking about. In general, when you talk about different type of exports, this competitive angle has to come through. So that's an important piece. So I hope that this will be continued, and it's been specifically mentioned that the foreign missions will be playing an active role in this regard, which I think is a very important dynamic. It's more of a policy direction being articulated in the budget and continued from the past. So that's the first angle. The second thing I wanted to touch, Davinda, was related to the local market that apparel is going in, because we have a product that we cater to some of the global's best brands and to the Western and the global markets, which are highly quality sensitive and something that we can actually market in the Sri Lankan context, but of course with a different objective. So at the moment, tourism is not a big boost because of the current situation in the country. But once things pick up, I think it will be important to build that up, because the strategy is to look at how we can use the industry to take it to the next level by bringing in tourism to Sri Lanka by using these type of shopping, like what was happening in Singapore, etc. So I think we have seen this opportunity by creating different export opportunities on one side, but on the other side, locally creating a market to supply, because for that, I think we've already seen that the duty to the local market has been reduced to 25 from 100, which indirectly should help the overall scheme of things to look at how tourism can be brought in, and then tourists, when they come to Sri Lanka, there has to be a reason for them to come, not just for entertainment, but also for the shopping angle. So that's exactly what countries like Singapore did. And by bringing this, if we can make the product qualities there's no doubt about it. If you can offer it at a competitive price, then I think definitely the Indian tourist is a very big tourist market that we can target, looking at the shopping angle to it when things obviously settle down. But I think these few initiatives have been articulated in the budget, which I think is a good and a positive sign.
Thank you, Hasan. I think you made a very point in when you mentioned about creating a high-end market for tourists to visit Sri Lanka and purchase. I think I remember in about 2013 and 14, the then government removed taxes on high-end wristwatches, cameras, all high-end items. And I think we really encouraged a lot of Sri Lankans to buy here rather than spending money overseas, as well as foreigners buying, and those companies did quite well. So I think that's a good point to be taken. Hopefully tourism improves. But Sri Lankans can also afford to buy rather than spending money overseas. They also can buy it here. There's quite a lot of Sri Lankans also who buy overseas.
And that import angle, to mean that now we import quite a lot of clothing to Sri Lanka. So yes. by having the products made in Sri Lanka being used within Sri Lanka, it's one side. Obviously the market size won't be that big. It'll be small, but it will be somewhat meaningful. But it's really going to make a difference when the export angle is being, or the tourism angle is being looked at. We actually use that as a platform to attract tourism into Sri Lanka for shopping. I mean, we all know how Singapore did, how Hong Kong did, and some of the other regional economies with the, attracting tourism angle came in with the shopping being made attractive, and there are products to buy.
So that's a very good thought. I hope the policymakers will take that into account. Thank you, Hasita, for that. So with that, I move on to Mr. Mitrapala. Srilal, you're online. Srilal, hi, Srilal. Sorry to keep you waiting for so long. Srilal, your industry is, I mean, everyone knows what you're going through currently, and we all feel sorry for the industry as a whole, because not only the direct people who are engaged, but also indirectly all of us who are servicing the tourist industry have knock-on effects. I know Budget 221 cannot give anything more to you because it's not a revenue issue, it was a tax issue, it's not a domestic issue, it's an international issue. So, were you expecting anything more, a lot more than this for the government to do in the budget? Or are you happy with what the government has done? And how do you think we can survive in this situation, Srilal?
Okay, Tuminda, yes, I think thanks everyone. Yes, as you said, we are the industry that is really down at our knees, and we will be the industry that will have to take longest to recover, because we are stuck with the whole value chain and the supply chain of the whole world. A long time, I think 18 months or 2 years they're talking about. So that is where I think in our context, as you very correctly said, what the government needs to do is to support us, because big and small alike, all of us are suffering. There's no revenue, and there's a large number of staff who are destitute right now. We are holding on to them as much as possible. So yes, it's a mixed feeling for us. The positives are the debt moratorium being extended till September next year. That is good. We are very happy with that. The second thing is the statement that the local government taxes will be somewhat rationalized. You know, as you said, we have been stuck with all kinds of taxes being levied to us from all sides. And one important thing I noticed that the Prime Minister mentioned, that the tourism industry is a $10 billion industry. That's a big, at least that the government has recognized that we are so big. So I hope going forward, there'll be some things, but of course we were hoping that we would get some wage support, which was approved by the cabinet, but unfortunately it didn't see the light of day. We need some cash infusion. I know it's very difficult for the government to do something like this, but you know, debt moratoriums, we are only postponing the cash problem, right? Because someday it's going to hit us again, and we ask for the interest, the capitalized interest also to be taken off. That was also not forthcoming, perhaps. And as everyone said, the 60-year rule for tourism industry is pretty bad, because I think our industry is a more youthful industry where we need young blood to come in. So I think we need to look at that, particularly in the industry. So all in all, we were looking for a few more support, levies, tourism licenses to be deferred. I guess all that will come outside the budget. But as you said, we are with our backs, not backs to the wall, we are down on our knees. And it's very, very difficult right now to see any light at the end of the tunnel. So whatever the budget has given us, we are thankful, and we hope that the government will look at some other possible means of supporting the industry and getting by this difficult time. Thanks.
Thank you, Srila. We all sincerely hope that everything will be all right for you. And I was also told that the government is looking outside the budget to perhaps give relief in liquor licenses and all those things, maybe even defer the payment of the liquor license, not necessarily, but yeah, I think those are taking place outside the budget, and I hope those come true.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. So my next question is to Dr. Chandranath Amrasekar, Director of Research of Central Bank of Sri Lanka. Dr. Amrasekar, you're online.
Yes, I am. My internet connection has slowed, so I'll keep my
I can hear you very clearly.
Switched on.
I can hear you.
Yes.
I can hear you. Since we have been keeping us so long, I can give extra 2 minutes to talk, Dr. Chandranath. You can give your initial response. Plus, I actually want to ask you some questions. One question in response to what Nishan from Verity mentioned about the budget making, budget process of budget making. How good it is, how transparent it is, and whether really effective or not, or this just presenting for sake of presenting a budget. So I think that question I want to come to you once the panel discussion is over, but you can take extra 2 minutes and answer question response to Nishan. And a very valid point Nishan raised, if you can answer that as well after giving your points of view.
Thank you very much, and I think we've had an excellent discussion so far, and I'm privileged to be here listening to all of you. And let me limit my remarks to the medium-term macroeconomic aspirations of the budget, and I will try to respond to Nishan also later on. So as discussed by several other speakers earlier, the COVID pandemic has caused havoc across the world. And for Sri Lanka, this has unfortunately and hopefully temporarily derailed the achievement of the aspirations of the people as well as the government. In spite of this setback, which is reflected in the budget as a continuation of higher budget deficits in 2020 and 2021, the government has announced its desire to achieve a 4% budget deficit in the medium term, with revenue increasing to above 14%. At the same time, debt to GDP ratio is expected to be brought down to 70%, with the domestic to foreign share of debt being adjusted in favor of domestic debt. Also, real GDP growth is expected to reach 6%. And inflation is targeted at 5%, which is not different to the expectations under the central bank's ongoing flexible inflation targeting policy framework. But as Nishan very bluntly pointed out, expectations versus reality could be quite different. And let us hope that with the strong government in place, and let us hope that it's going to be a benevolent government, and that this time the government will deliver on those macroeconomic numbers. At the same time, the way we see it, this is a reform budget, and people may have different views on what reforms there should be. But I think we all agree that we need reforms, and reforms need to be implemented, as Professor Watavala said at the very beginning, without further delay. If I may very briefly summarize what those reforms are, touching upon just three. Number one, I think strengthening the domestic production economy, promoting exports, and attracting foreign direct investment. That's one of the key reforms that have been highlighted in the budget. And we know that these are essential for production-driven higher growth and employment generation. And these are also crucial to reduce external current account deficits in a sustainable way and address the long-standing external sector vulnerabilities, as well as the fiscal vulnerabilities of the economy. And number two, financial sector reforms to support the production economy. And again, we have long felt the need for a strong financial sector. And when you go through the budget, you see a series of reforms proposed towards this end. And the government expects the financial sector to reorient its business processes to support production. And there is a steep deviation from the usual practice of depending on providing import-related commercial credit, which may be more profitable in the short term to the financial institution and the merchant, but less so to the economy. And the third one, the final one, is the introduction of a retirement benefit scheme for a wider population. Again, we know that there is a long overdue reform, and introduction of such a scheme to cover formal and informal private sector as well as migrant workers will eventually pave way for a more flexible labor market and address the wedge between formal and informal sectors, private and public sectors, and good and bad jobs, and also improve productivity of the entire economy. And I think these are reforms that all Sri Lankans must support for the betterment of the country and its people. To some extent, I think I agree with what Nishan said about the transparency of the budget. As the central bank, we do not get involved too much with the budgeting process, except for the confidential report that we submit to the government, that we have to submit to the government by the 15th of September each year, highlighting the key vulnerabilities of the economy and the relationship between fiscal policy and monetary policy, and also providing our own budget proposals. And but I think, when I was looking at Nishan's numbers, I noticed that some of the differences, some of the small differences, probably come from the treatment of provincial councils in regard to with regard to revenue, expenditure, and so on. But just like Nishan, we also have had concerns in the past as to the expectations versus reality. I'll stop there, and we can probably discuss later.
Yes, I will just one more question from you, Dr. Amrasekara, based on what Nishan said. You have the revenue proposals that are coming out, which gives, okay, we are expecting X amount of revenue from this proposal. Is there a process where central bank monitors the proposal in terms of revenue collection? Because you are all people who keep statistics and records of government revenue and expenditure. Do you have a process of where you compare the revenue that are proposed as opposed to how much you achieve at the end of the year and report Parliament on it?
This is, of course, our source is also the Treasury. So we also depend on the Treasury to obtain the final revenue and expenditure numbers. And on just like the other researchers in the country, we also monitor the performance of revenue against what is budgeted. and also in the process of monetary policy making, we take these, I mean, the fiscal performance also we take that also into consideration. But apart from that, we don't have an active role that we play with regard to formulating revenue and expenditure proposals of the budget.
Thank you, Dr. Amarasekara. Adishilal, your microphone is on. If you have to switch it off, please.
Okay.
Final question on the first round of panel discussion is to Dimantha Sengara. Dimantha, you're online.
Yes, Daminda.
Hi, Dimantha. I'm so sorry to have kept you for so long. Being a very busy banker, I'm sorry to have done that. Dimantha, so I'm going to give extra 2 or 3 minutes to answer your questions. First, I must say that you are kept undisturbed this time. Otherwise, every budget, every year, you are the person who carries the baby, right? Carries the can in the end. And you have been in the forefront of paying heavy taxes for the last many years. Successive governments impose heavy taxes on you, up for 60% of your profits. And so this time, you have been kept untouched. And you have also, the relief that you got at the beginning of the year has not also been changed. So you can respond to those initial comments I made, Dimantha, and also give your views from bankers' perspective. There were four areas that they mentioned for bankers in the budget proposal. I'll come to the 4 questions separately, but if you can give your views on the budget and the 2 questions I asked earlier.
Okay, thank you, Devinda, for those questions, and also thank you for Dr. Professor Vatawala for the opportunity given. Yes, you're correct, Devinda. I think the banking industry has been battered for a couple of years, debt repayment levy and whatnot. And we are talking about industry which is actively contributing to the economy. 11 trillion in assets, and if you take the finance companies, 1.5 trillion, altogether 12.5 trillions. And we have been taking the brunt of the issues, current COVID-related, the debt moratoriums and all. Even prior to that, the Easter tax and all have been handled by a stable banking industry. And it's pleasing to note that the method of tax calculation have been kept intact without making any changes. So that's a relief. Apart from that, there are some positive opportunities as well. The one on the tax matter is about hopefully the Indian revenue to consider cash flow basis impairment. There was something mentioned in that, because right now we go by the day count provisioning for future tax computation. So if that happens, that could be a good way forward, because the entire industry has moved to IFRS-based cash flow projection-based provisioning. And if Indian revenue also move to that, that would also make sure that we are all in par with the tax treatment. Apart from that, the mergers, some of the tax concessions that have been provided to encourage the finance companies to consolidate. I think that is probably a right call here, because there are more than 50 finance companies and some are having issues in terms of capital, and we have seen few companies also going under. So encouraging by giving tax concessions for these merger activities, whatever expenses that you incur, is again, I would say that we should encourage and welcome that move. Apart from that, we also saw some treatment in terms of risk-weighted assets and also the tax elements for the government sovereign bond holdings in dollars, if it is more than $100 million. This is also welcome move. Hopefully, I mean, that would encourage the local banks to subscribe to this, so that whatever the funds going out from the country when these are paid would remain within the country. And also a treatment of risk-weighted assets would also free up some capital tied up on the sovereign exposure that we are carrying, though it is denominated in a foreign currency. Plus the opportunities that have been shown in terms of power sector, the water irrigation sector, the pharmaceutical, the agri, export agri, all those being encouraged, and even the small power projects at the village level that have been highlighted, the solar power projects, those would give some kind of a SME and other credit opportunities for the banks to support this growth. An area that we are a bit unclear is about the 2 rupee exchange, additional 2 rupees that the banks are supposed to pay when remittance comes. Who would bear that cost? I think the assumption here is that something similar to the maybe the senior citizens deposit subsidy payment. But if that happens, I mean, that's something that clear area that we are not clear. I mean, that would also encourage the remittances. We have seen quite a good growth in the remittances. They were averaging now $700 million a month compared to what was about 500 million in the earlier cases. So these are some of the positive developments and would like to contribute later in the Q&A session. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much, Dimantha, for that explanation on your views on the budget. Now, if I turn to the next line of questioning, I want to go to Nishan. Nishan, are you still here? I was told that you were to leave early. Is Nishan Dimel here or? Oh. Right. So I don't think he's here because I want to raise a question on what you said. If I turn back to Sena Gajendran, who has been silent for some time, Mr. Gajendran, what do you think about the amnesties that have been offered? There are also, Gajen, are you online? Can you hear me?
Yes, I'm online.
Yeah, the amnesties that have been offered. There are also the SME sector that returns are to be taken as final and no more assessments for this year. You know, in the context of you as a tax practitioner as much as I am, and we have the wider population who's paying tax, who's very compliant in paying tax. So when you compare the two, how do these amnesties and these exemptions compare with those who are paying tax, and what is your view on that? Is it the right thing to do or not the right thing to do?
I think the government's intention is to, for especially the foreign currencies to come in. And if you see, there has been some misstatements made in the clarifications whether this amnesty will bring about a reversal on the question of grey listing of the country. But if you start going back with the Exchange Act, 2017, there was 1% levy imposed for 1 million remittances over $1 million. Even after that, in October 2019, the listing was removed. The grey listing was removed. So I think internationally what they are looking at is on the question of money laundering and drug trafficking, not on tax evasion, because countries want the monies due to them back into their countries. So this is one way of bringing the money back into the country and 1%. But Sri Lanka, traditionally, the amnesties have failed. If you see, even this exchange amnesty or relief they gave, only I'm told 9 people have brought in monies, and that's also all of them are less than $1 million. So that has traditionally failed because the question of trust and blackballing and blacklisting that can happen after you come into the net. So in that environment, whether this amnesty will be successfully implemented is a question. But I think basically the government wants the money to be brought back, and they want even the black economy to brought surfaced into the white economy. In that score, I think even the professionals will have a duty, or there has to be a role. How are you going to help if they are keen on coming into the white economy from the black economy? Many of them are partially here and partially there. How are you going to, the professionals going to help them? Because the minister is expecting the professionals to help them out, in the transitional process. which can be a challenging thing even for the professionals. How are you going to encourage them to enlist into a full disclosure situation than being on a partial disclosure? The other thing is, for these amnesties to work and the taxes to be paid, particularly in the South Asian context, is what does the tax money do? People have to see the tax money is doing good for the society. Certain Nordic countries are mentioned where the taxes are as high as 60%, and still there is compliance and willingness to pay is there because of the social security system, the facilities that provided by the tax money. Here again, because of the erosion of tax base, Sri Lanka is one of the countries where there has been no direct benefit given to the people other than the 5,000 rupees which was given. Other than the 5,000 rupees given, there is no direct benefit given to the people or to the business entities, because we have lost about varying numbers have been said. We have lost about 400 to 600, 700, 800 billion in tax revenue. Of course, those waivers of tax and reduction of tax came before the COVID. So it's a alarming situation for Sri Lanka because numbers have to be achieved. The three numbers that will be in the budget, if you see, you have the revenue target of 2 trillion, and there is skepticism whether it will not be achieved. Then you have the public expenditure of 1 trillion, which was last year is only 400 billion. And the most important thing is they are going to focus on domestic borrowing. And there is 1 trillion being to be raised from non-banking sources. That means the government has to raise money from people like you and me on treasury bills and bonds. So whether we are able to raise 1 trillion out of 2016, we are closing in at 16 trillion GDP, whether we can generate 1 trillion from the people of Sri Lanka to achieve these things. So it's going back to the initial remark I made, there has to be hands-on implementation on a regular basis. Professionals have to be brought up, professionalism has to be brought in without allowing the politicians to do, because you know what they will do. So we have a professional in the finance ministry now in that sense. So answering your question on the amnesty, hope it works, but like in the past, there can be skepticism of the whole process. What was the other thing you mentioned, Duminda? Is
no, basically whether it is fair by those who are paying tax was the question I answered. So question I asked.
Yeah, that question is there, because if you see even in a country like Indonesia, when the CRS was introduced, they had to introduce a 3% because most of the Chinese majorities who were alienated by the Chinese minorities who were alienated by the majority had they placed their monies in Singapore. But when the CRS system came in and information was shared voluntarily by Singapore to Indonesia, their monies flew back because they said you pay 3% or we know where the money is and we are going to take penal actions. But we don't have a comparative situation here. Of course, this is a situation where people are saying people in the tax net also have been paying. But on that score, relief has been given to the SMEs. Where if there are any assessments pending up to 18, 19, it will be written off. And 19, 20 also, there will be no questions asked. So one segment of the compliant taxpayers have been also given relief. And if you see in the 2005 or 2001 amnesty, relief was given to all, but that again didn't go through because some reversals took place. So there is empirical evidence or learnings which are not conducive for this, but hope this works for the country.
Thanks, Gaj, for that very illustrative answer. Mr. Rajapaksa, are you online? I want to ask a question from you.
Yes, I am online.
Yes, Mr. Rajapaksa, my question to you is: the government is encouraging domestic industry and domestic manufacturing, and you are one of the pioneers in domestic manufacturing industry. Now, there are a series of tax concessions they have proposed from 7 years to 10 years tax holiday for different types of industries. Do you think tax holidays per alone can augment industry in Sri Lanka, or are there other conducive factors that should contribute for a business like you to start business in Sri Lanka?
As Suresh mentioned, these tax holidays are not going to work right now because there's with the present situation, if you want to boost the industry, we have to follow what J.R. Jayawardena did to the tourist industry. He implemented investment relief. When you give a tax relief, you must first generate the profit to have a tax relief. If you don't have profit, there's no purpose. What we should do is, a company who is going to invest on a project, the company investing must have an investment relief. That is what in 1970s on the tourist industry, the Section 16cc relief. That is a huge relief, and that is why all these intercontinental, all these hotels came up, because of everybody who had money invested on those things, and they got a investment relief. That is 100% investment is allowed tax reduction. Right now they allow tax holidays, but who is going to invest? The investor also must have a facility. Investor doesn't have anything, so investor wants to invest money and wait for because the first few years they had no profit coming up. To qualify for the tax holiday, first of all, they have to generate profits. If the profit is, he is taking a big risk by investing. But if the investment relief is there, surely many people invest, and we must see the success story, what happened in tourist industry when Mr. J.R. Jayawardena was there. He put up this, and all this Aludgama, all the tourist hotels came up because of the relief that they have given for the tourist industry. I think that is the thing that we have to follow.
A very, very valid point. What you're saying is you have cash saving upfront. You don't have to wait until 7 years, 8 years to your investments to be returned. So people have incentive to invest immediately. So I think that's a very, very valid point. I think successively also there was a investment relief grant, and I think with that only Jonkeys, I remember, invested in the port city, etc. Sorry, in the Queen Elizabeth Key. So I think investment relief is better than giving a tax holiday, is what you're saying, which I think is right. May I now invite Mr. Suleiman Nista. Suleiman, are you online? Hello?
Yes, I'm on.
Suleiman, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Suleiman, the question to you is on this consolidation of taxes. Currently, I mean, there are various views expressed on the special goods and services tax, but currently all some of those products are under consolidation. And previously also they were under consolidation, and they've been back to introducing VAT. So they have been consistent in terms of the policy, right? So, for example, if you take liquor and tobacco were under consolidation at one time, and they subsequently revised it. So, do you think this consolidation is just merely to ease administration, or is it a revenue-raising measure? What is your view on that?
I think it's more revenue. We saw that, I think, primarily with the vehicle industry, where they took VAT out and then consolidated everything. And ultimately, you didn't get the input that you were getting otherwise on the VAT as well. So that is potentially likely to impact the other four industries as well. If they do consolidate with solely the intention of revenue, which I think the Treasury Secretary also did mention, there may be a slight up. It won't be lower than what they're paying now, it will be higher. And then also for administrative ease to consolidate everything and for them to pay one. So I think it will be two-pronged, the objective. One is simplification to an extent so that you don't have to comply with too many statutes and regulators, plus to increase revenue as well.
Thank you. Suresh, may I turn to you? Are you online, Suresh? Sorry, I kept you for long.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, Suresh, my question to you is on this proposed insurance contribution to the insurance fund. I heard in some other fora that the secretary attended. He said the contribution will go into, will not go into consolidated fund. It will go into separate insurance fund. So in that context, I think you raised a question whether it can be passed down to the customer or not. That issue doesn't arise, or does it arise? And number two, a member who's in the audience is asking the question, whether it has to be deductible for income tax purposes. So my question to you, if it's only a contribution, then can it be deducted as income tax? And then also can it be passed out to the customer? So in that context, what's your view on this proposed insurance scheme? It's going to be a huge amount.
Yeah, correct, because this is going to be a huge amount depending on, because it's a huge tax base. Now, before coming to the deductibility issue, how to graph the legislation, I think there's another point that we need to understand, Dominda, because tax base is high, 0.25, and it's going to become a big, huge collection. Now, how this huge collection going to be utilized? Now, according to the budget proposal, it's for the benefit of the employees in the wholesale, retail, and the hotel sector. That's all. So, are we actually looking at this as a proper COVID relief for the entire country? Is the question that I have in my mind. Now, I was reading something in Daily Mail in UK. Now, there's a discussion going on with regard to how to provide the financial relief to the people who are affected by the pandemic. So, there the proposal is, or the discussion is, to collect a tax from the people who are working from home. That means people who are having a fixed salary. So, collect something from them and then distribute it to the people who are affected. So from equity perspective, yes, it seems okay, but I don't know how it will get implemented. But here in Sri Lanka, what we are focusing on is basically only the employees in the wholesale, retail, and the hotel sector. But that's not the only segment that is affected by the pandemic, no? So the utilization of the fund, I think we need to look at, because considering the quantum of the contribution or the quantum of the funds that will be collected. On the question of whether it is deductible, what should happen is basically if the policy of the government is to get a deduction, yes, then it should be specifically provided for in the law.
Thank you, Suresh, for that. May now turn to Vish. Are you there, Vish, online? Mr. Vish Godiswamy. Vish, are you online? Yes. Vish, you also highly involved in the dairy industry. The government has proposed various concessions to the dairy industry. One thing is to export the manufacture of powdered milk. Now, currently we are a net import of milk powder. I think about 85% of the requirement is met by import of milk powder, and we only have a small element of liquid milk. So given that scenario, is it a feasible proposition? Whatever incentives you do tax-wise, is it something that can be achieved?
Yeah, so from the little I know about the powdered milk, you know, the capex is very high. And they have provided something like $25 million, up to $25 million that the incentives will come. First of all, I think Sri Lanka needs to increase the quantity of milk produced, because you know, for every liter of milk, you get only X grams of powdered milk. It's not 1-to-1. So we need huge quantities of milk produced. So to do that, first of all, we need to increase the current yields, which means we have to get high quality animals to come. And which means if you get high quality animals, you need to have the feed, right, to feed them. So there's the entire back end that needs to be done before an incentive like this could work. Given that, I think there is a lot of work that is being done right now for the feed creation. I think the Dairy Association has made a lot of inroads in lobbying to make sure land is being made available. So even right now, you know, they want maize to be grown locally. They've already banned maize, import of maize. What happens to the current cattle that was consuming the imported maize? So there are some disconnects like this, right? So right now, the yields are dropping on the current milk that we have, because they don't have enough maize to feed those high-end animals that some of us have brought in the last 5 years or so. Export of milk powder, I think it'll be a huge challenge, because you take countries like Australia, New Zealand, and all of Europe. You take a place like Ireland, they have excess quantity of milk. So they're able to easily convert that to powder and export. And if you take a milk powder as a commodity, I mean, the price that these things are selling is so cheap, and to compete with that will be a huge challenge. But what we can definitely do is reduce the powder that's coming into the country, save the foreign exchange by changing our habits to drinking fresh milk than powdered milk. I think that's the first goal, and I think the government is doing a lot for that. And again, if we do that in a very structured manner, we will be saving huge amount of foreign exchange.
So, which is a purchase of liquid milk more expensive than powdered milk for average Sri Lankan household?
Yeah, currently it's quite expensive because for X gram of powder, when you convert to liquid, there's more liquid from a kilo of powder than every time you buy a liter of milk, right? So that equation has to change over time because all this while there has been subsidy for the powdered milk as well, as you remember. Successive governments have given powdered milk at a cheaper rate because that's part of the basket, economic basket that is required. So over time, if there is excess of liquid milk, the price will stabilize with demand, and then it could be made affordable.
Okay, thanks, Vish, for that.
Dominga, do you think it is a mistake in the budget, this export, because it's so really to meet the local demand? I think it's
that's the thing. So I really don't know that proposal whether it makes sense. So Professor Vattavela, we are 5:15. I want one question to be, one or two more questions to ask. I want to ask a question from Dimantha. Dimantha, are you online?
Yes, Dominga.
Yes, Dimantha. The question to you is not in the budget, but ask you for your views. At one time there were certain concessions granted to the banking industry in terms of interest subsidies on tax. That is, your interest will be taxed at a lesser rate of tax than the normal rate if you granted loans to specific industries. Do you think that kind of incentive is practical, or has it got a demand? Do you think that is sustainable?
Sorry, the question is a bit unclear.
No, the question to you, sorry, the question to you is, if there's a tax concession given to the banks to tax you at a reduced rate on your interest income, if the loans to which the interest relate to are diverted towards specific priority industries. For example, at one time, I remember, if you gave loans to the garment industry at the inception many years ago, if you gave loans to the agriculture sector, your income was taxed at a lesser rate. Is there a demand for that kind of credit, divert credit, that kind of line, if there's a tax incentive?
I think certainly that's a good suggestion to explore. That would encourage naturally the banks to lend to this deserving sector. So what the government is paying, basically bearing is the foregoing of particular tax element, whereas the lending is happened through the banking system.
Right.
So I think that's a good way to look at it.
So that at least you incentivize the banks. You all also have to take the risk of the industry to account in a lending. So that can be counterweighted to an extent by giving a tax concession. I was thinking something like that might have been in proposal. The government they want money to go into, say, tourism temporarily to give relief, something of that nature. So, Professor, I couldn't cover all the panelists in the time you allocated to me. We are at 5:15 now, and
10 minutes.
Can I take 5 minutes more?
10 minutes. 10 minutes.
Right. So, Mr. Hapawarachi, are you online from the Inland Revenue?
Yes. Okay.
Mr. Hapawarachi, the Prime Minister in his budget speech mentioned was strengthening the administration of the department to recover more taxes from the larger taxpayers. That is age-ready rule. But in my view, currently also that is how it works. The larger taxpayers are the ones who pay 80% tax. So where is the weakness in the department in strengthening their procedures to make sure the large taxpayers don't pay the real tax? Is there a real problem there that you see, or is there no problem in the large taxpayers? It's a difficult question I'm asking.
Yeah, of course. One of the most difficult questions I have ever faced. But as we understand from this also, there may be sometimes where due to sort of not using the expertise, or maybe lack of expertise, or due to a lot of work. I mean, thinking about the workload, sometimes have been for our officers who are dealing with the large taxpayer files as well as some medium taxpayer and like that, if they are coming together, right? But given the fact that the LTOs were handled separately throughout the last decade or something like that, actually we can think that we achieved the possible or potential revenue from them if we think about the revenue side, or we assessed them correctly. So that's the understanding. But still, there may be some areas that we are lagging behind, or some drains of revenue regarding those files also. So I think when we manage better than how we did for the previous period by emphasizing the administration of LTUs, we can go for actually here. Don't just think only about the revenue as well as better implementation of the rules and regulations. Of course, as you know very well, is a rule-based tax act, and also there are some other weak points in the administration also, as you really see. Actually, I think your question drags me to certain areas that is out of the legislation and other things, right? You know, actually there are three. If you allow me maybe another 2 minutes, I can speak on that. Actually, in this game of taxation, we are having three players. One is the most important player, taxpayer, playing together with the tax consultant in one side. The other player is, of course, the tax official. So, as I think the message should be given clearly to both sides. And if the three players in this playing with each other for their achievement, for example, let's say from the angle of the taxpayer and tax consultant, minimum tax liability, or from the angle of the IRD officer, let's say the maximum tax revenue for the government. So that shouldn't be the correct thing, as I understand, should be the proper tax revenue. If we agree on that aspect in these LTU files, probably we can have a little bit of higher revenue sometimes from that. The other case is that you know very well that all other files are generating only about 20% or something like that. So that's another issue to consider about those files also. But I think all these players should play, without doing any wrongdoing activities. So that's another aspect that I always think about, because, you know, as you know very well, due to corruption and so many other things, the potential revenue part of that is going out of the coffers. So we have to think about that also. I'm sorry for taking a little bit of additional time. So that's also an area that we should need to put our attention. Thank you very much. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Thank you very much for being with us all this time. Hasita, before I conclude, I want two more people to answer. Hasita, are you online?
Yes, I'm in.
Hasita, the question to you is, if the government by any chance legislates this minimum age requirement at 60 years, how do you think industrialists, foreign investors will look at it? Because you have so many people knocking on the door for jobs today. And the longer you keep them, well, there are a few who work hard, but the efficiency drops and the cost goes up. So in that context, if you legislate it, will Sri Lanka be attractive for foreign investments? We already have tough labor laws anyway.
Yes. No, I think there are two angles to this, right? One angle is that there are certain individuals and certain parties who continue through, and then even if you close at 55, you will rejoin back as a consultant or some other form, and then continue till 60 plus because you are adding value to the organization and you are needed, and therefore you're being anyway kind of taken in a different form. The other angle to it is that obviously there are certain jobs, certain positions, like you said, as the age progresses, the productivity starts dropping, and maybe you might be able to bring a younger person to perform that better. So those are the two dynamics that need to be managed. So my view is that there has to be, like some of the previous speakers said, that the choice to be given for the company, the business, to take that call, especially because these jobs vary time to time, unless we get into some form of a mode where there is extension that's being given, but subject to certain specific positions and criteria being met, so that there will be certain roles, etc., which you cannot have beyond a particular age. But having said that, I think in India we go through this quite regularly, because India has the age being extended as well to almost 60 now. It was moved to 57 and then 59, and talking about 60 with the age population. But I think it will gradually evolve, and I think this type of areas, you need to give a little bit of time without bringing it overnight. And if you give a passage of say 2 to 3 years to smoothen it, I think we will all get used to it. Because from a country perspective, you might have a population aging, and as a result of that, maybe there'll be a burden on the government to look after them at the end of the day. So that, to an extent, get resolved with them being in employment till 60. So there are two sides to the story here. But my thing is that if this proposal goes through, I think it should be done with a transition period, because certain areas have already been planned by businesses in terms of retirement, succession planning, and building up new talent in. So suddenly, if you say, no, now hold everything up and just continue till 60, that can give a little bit of a shock to people. So I think it should be done with a transition plan. If it's done that way, I think it's a fair call from both angles.
Thank you, Hasita. You can diplomatically cover it. Okay, very good. Dr. Amarasekar, are you online?
No, he's gone. He's gone. Yeah.
He's gone. Kanishka, so my last question of this discussion is to Kanishka. Kanishka, are you online?
Yes, I'm online.
Kanishka, one thing is, I hope you make representations on behalf of the Ceylon Chamber, etc., on this proposal. The other thing what I want to ask you is, there are reference to EPF. Now, currently people withdraw EPF at 55. So if there is a transition of that law and compulsory 60, then people have to wait till 60 to get the EPF, right? And what do you think is that fair or not?
Yeah, this is something that we need to clarify, because I have the budget proposal with me, Duminda. It doesn't talk about actually reference to legislating a retirement age. They talk about the retirement age, but in the context of what I understand from the proposal is to enhance or increase the threshold of EPF withdrawals to 60. So currently, irrespective of gender, they can withdraw EPF at 55. As I mentioned earlier, women can withdraw at 50, but that's their choice. And even women can even do that before that if they're leaving the workforce, but of course they have to make a declaration saying they're not coming back. And that used to happen in the garment sector, where women used to collect EPF and leave very early. So this is something that we need to clarify. According to what I understand, it's the threshold of EPF withdrawals that is to be, or an EPF and ETF withdrawals. This only talks about EPF. Is to be increased. So this is something that we need to clarify. So yes, to answer your question, we have made representations on behalf of all employers, including the Ceylon Chamber and our affiliated associations group. We will also be discussing this matter with all of our stakeholders, including our membership and employers, a wider array of employers. Once we get those clarifications, then that's why we have called for an urgent meeting of the National Labour Advisory Council, where all the employment issues are supposed to be discussed and implemented. And these proposals also ought to have been discussed beforehand, before being tabled like this, but unfortunately it has come in this form. So we now need to double back and clarify as to how they are going to implement, and also do it in a way that it doesn't affect the stakeholders much. And if it's a retirement age, then again we'll have to, as I think Hasita quite rightly, very diplomatically put it, we have to balance it off and ensure that it's at least on a prospective basis, because otherwise there can be implications. As you know, already employers are balancing a situation where they retain human capital as well as also provide for youth aspirations, and so things like succession planning has become difficult because youth don't stay in one place. So these are some of the issues that the government will have to think of.
Yeah, thank you. I think this is a far-reaching proposal because we already have tough labor laws in this country. So this will only add to that, in my view.
And one thing, Dhuminder, I wanted to mention was even the social security aspect. They are talking about relief. Currently, there was a discussion that was initiated before the Minister of Labour, that was at the last NLAC meeting, about a social security policy that will replace various other payments. I mean, it's too early to talk about it, and it was not going to sort of burden the employers further. And we have also sought technical support from the ILO to address this issue. And we said we will also incorporate, extend that cooperation to the government so that, employers are not further burdened. That's the objective. But this seems to be, again, going back to taking from employers, because this is a highly technical issue, but even there are certain commitments which the government has to carry out in terms of, for example, extending maternity benefits. Under the convention that Sri Lanka has signed, committee of experts which went into the convention has told Sri Lanka to establish a social security fund so that employers are burdened less. Now, currently, we are actually covering all the expenses on maternity benefits, but according to the convention, the government has to contribute something so that the burden on employers will be less. So that's the type of social security that we were thinking. So I think we need to again clarify and come into alignment.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much, Kanishka.
And also, Professor Lakshman, whatever, thank you very much.
Wait, Dhuminder, we need to take a photo. If everyone can unmute their video, then we can pose for a photograph.
Unmute the video or only unmute? Okay.
No, unmute the video. Yeah, we want to take a photo. Suresh, can you? Right.
Hold on, sir.
Okay.
Wait, sir. Okay, thank you, sir.
Right, thank you. Okay.
So, Professor Vatela, with that, I hand over sessions to you. The moderation is concluded. I thank very much all the panelists, and I'll hand it over to Professor Vatela. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think we have a poll to be taken. Shall we just do it fast? Actually, the participants will have to click and then give their answers. So now it is available in progress. If everyone can maybe click and say, first one is, do you expect the government to achieve the anticipated tax revenue in this low tax regime? Either you can say yes or no. Then in the event the government is unable to achieve its expected fiscal target, what impact would it have on the macroeconomic fundamentals? I think everyone will have to click so that we get an answer from you all. Government will increase taxes, government will resort to local borrowing and cost pressures, or both of the above. Then the next one is on the insurance. The COVID, the new COVID-19 insurance scheme is to be charged at 0.25% of turnover is good for the country. And given we are an aging population, should there be a mandatory increase in the retirement age in the public and private sector to 60 years? Yes or no? Do you think it is a good fiscal policy to grant tax incentives for those who have not paid the proper taxes in the past? Yes or no? Another 2 minutes. After that, we are ending the poll. So please give it. Okay. Anything? Right. 20, 23, 24. Very few people have voted. Why don't you all vote, please? Okay, maybe 32, 83, 34, 35, 36. Okay. Okay, we are going to end the poll so that we can then see the results. 39, 40. Okay. 39%, 41. Okay. 43. Okay, finish here. Indeed. Okay. Go, let me give the results. Okay, these are the results. Yeah, okay. First one, it's 65%. Do we expect the government to achieve the anticipated? So no, and again, in the event of the government unable to achieve the tax, will they increase 9%? Then on the new COVID insurance, yes, 57, and fourth one, aging population, 67% no, and the next one, it is, yeah, again no, right, okay. So we will end it. Okay, fine. Compare, yeah.
As we come to the end of today's proceedings, we are most thankful to all our speakers, panelists, and our moderator, and also to our dearest participants. I now invite Mr. Naika Bandara, Vice President of CMA Sri Lanka, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Dilani. Ladies and gentlemen, during the past 6 days, all of you would have heard through various channels different interpretation for the budget, such as investment budget, growth budget, balanced budget, business-friendly budget, reform budget, and evenly poised budget, etc. Nevertheless, Honorable Minister, as usual, explained it in a very simple manner how the government is planning to meet the economic challenges that the country is currently facing by emphasizing the necessity to have sound and strong macro fundamentals. With that note, on behalf of CMA, let me extend a big thank to Honorable Minister for his participation as the chief guest and keynote speaker and articulating the benefits that the society will get over a period of time with the implementation of budget proposals and strategies. Let me also thank all distinguished speakers, Mr. Nista Suleiman, Mr. Suresh Perra, Dr. Nishan Dimel, and Dr. Rajapaksa for explaining tax proposals, implications on business and society, economic implication of the budget proposals. More importantly, technical and professional analysis provided by them on budget proposals would have been benefited to all of you to clear any doubt and confusion. I also would like to thank Mr. Guminda Ulangamua, the moderator, for the wonderful job done, and all panelists, namely Mr. Gajendran, Mr. Govindasamy, Mr. Hasita Pemaratna, Mr. Kanishka Veerasinghe, Mr. Hapuarachi, Mr. Dimanta Senivaratna, Dr. Chandranath Tamarsekara, Mr. Srilal Mitrapala, for the expertise and input provided to make all participants are aware of the subject matter and providing clarification to the extent possible within the time allocated to them. Let me also thank our President, Professor Lakshmana Vattawala, for the leadership provided and the CMA team for all the arrangement made to have a successful budget forum. Great to have all of you, ladies and gentlemen. Hope to see you all again. Take care, stay safe. Thank you. Good night. Over to Dilani.
Thank you, sir. And that marks the end of today's proceedings. It was indeed wonderful to have all of you with us today. Keep in touch for more and more valuable sessions organized for your benefit by CMA as part of its celebrations of its 20th anniversary. It's me, Dilani Jayatilaka, signing off for today. Stay safe and have a blessed stay at home.
Thank you. Thank you very much, I think, everyone for their contributions. And we look forward to see you and also for your valuable speakers and comments. So thank you and all the best to you, and keep safe, keep well. I think those are the two famous words we have. Thank you. Thank you and bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all.